Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Caldwell, and I've been a ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 16 years. In all that time, I've pulled 47 people out of these mountains, some lost, some hurt, some worse. I've seen plenty that would make city folks shake their heads, but nothing prepared me for what happened that October in 1974. The call came in on a Tuesday morning while I was checking my gear. 2 college kids from the University of Tennessee had gone missing near Backbone Rock. They were studying Cherokee burial sites for some anthropology project. Their professor said they'd been out there 3 days and missed their check-in, probably just lost track of time. I told my partner Jake Morrison as we loaded the truck. College kids don't know how fast weather can turn up here. Jake nodded, but I could see worry in his eyes. He'd grown up in these mountains same as me, third-generation Appalachian. We both knew October was when the mists came heavy and the cold could kill you if you weren't ready. The drive up to Backbone Rock took an hour on winding mountain roads. Every mile, the trees got thicker and the air got quieter. By the time we reached the trailhead, that familiar mountain silence had settled around us, the kind that makes your ears ring with phantom sounds. "Radio check," I said into my Motorola HT-200. Static crackled back. The mountains played hell with radio signals, especially in the hollows where ancient Cherokee had once walked these same paths. We found their camp about 2 miles in, tucked into a clearing beside a creek. At first glance, everything looked normal. Blue dome tent, backpacks hung properly from a rope between 2 trees, cold fire ring with rocks arranged in a neat circle. But something felt wrong. "Tom," Jake called from the fire pit. "Come look at this." I walked over and crouched beside him. The fire ring was clean, too clean. Not a single bone from their cooking remained. No fish bones, no chicken bones, nothing. Just cold ash and a few burnt pieces of wood. "Kids ate everything, bone and all?" Jake asked, scratching his beard. "Maybe they fed them to animals," I said, but even as I spoke I realized how quiet it was. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, nothing. We searched the camp methodically. Their notebooks lay open in the tent, filled with detailed drawings of strange symbols. One page caught my eye. It showed bone fragments arranged in geometric patterns, with a note scribbled in the margin. Asterisk, saw this in my dreams before we found the actual site. Asterisk, dreams? I muttered, flipping through more pages. The drawings got stranger. Spirals made of finger bones, skull arrangements that hurt to look at too long. And on the last page, written in shaky handwriting, asterisk, something's been moving our things at night. We hear counting in Cherokee. Neither of us speaks Cherokee. Asterisk. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. "Jake, we need to expand the search grid," I said, closing the notebook. "These kids found something they shouldn't have." We spent the rest of the morning following standard search protocol, calling their names every 50 yards, looking for tracks or broken branches. The trail the students had been following led deeper into the forest, toward the old Cherokee burial grounds that most locals avoided. My grandfather used to tell stories about those burial grounds. He called them cursed, said bone collectors lived up their spirits that took apart the dead to build new bodies for themselves. I'd always figured it was just mountain folklore, stories to keep kids from wandering off. Now I wasn't so sure. By noon, we'd covered 3 miles of rough terrain. The trail kept climbing, winding through thick rhododendron bushes and around massive limestone outcroppings. The higher we went, the colder it got, and the silence grew heavier. "You notice something?" Jake asked as we stopped for lunch beside a small waterfall. "What?" "No animals. Been hiking 4 hours and haven't seen so much as a chipmunk." He was right. The forest felt empty, like every living thing had packed up and left. Even the creek beside us seemed to run quieter than it should. I was reaching for my radio to call in our position when Jake grabbed my arm. "Listen," he whispered. Faint and far away, carried on the mountain wind, came the sound of rattling, like dice in a cup, but softer. More organic. Bones. The rattling sound led us off the main trail and up a steep ridge covered in ancient hardwoods. My compass started acting funny about halfway up, the needle spinning like it couldn't find north. Jake's did the same thing. "Equipment malfunction," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. We climbed for another hour, following game trails that seemed to lead nowhere. The mist was getting thicker, turning the world gray and uncertain. Tree branches reached out of the fog like gnarled fingers, and more than once I jumped at shadows that looked like crouching figures. "Tom." Jake's voice was tight. "Look at this." He was standing beside a huge oak tree, pointing at the trunk. Fresh cuts marked the bark symbols carved deep into the wood. They matched the drawings from the students' notebooks perfectly. "How fresh?" I asked, running my finger along the cuts. "Day or two, maybe, sap still bleeding." The symbols formed a pattern that spiraled around the tree trunk. Looking at them too long made my head hurt, like they were trying to tell me something my brain didn't want to understand. We kept climbing. The rattling sound came and went, always just ahead of us, always leading us higher into the mountains. Every time we got close, it would stop, then start up again from a different direction. "We're being led," Jake said. I knew he was right. Whatever was making that sound wanted us to follow. Question was, why? The answer came when we crested the ridge and found the cave. It was bigger than any cave I'd seen in these mountains, a gaping hole in the limestone that looked like a mouth open to scream. Ancient Cherokee symbols were carved into the rock around the entrance. But these weren't fresh cuts. These had been there for generations. And scattered around the cave mouth were bones, not animal bones, human bones. Finger bones and toe bones and teeth, arranged in careful patterns like the ones in the students' drawings. Some were old, yellowed with age. Others looked fresh, still white and clean. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered. I knelt beside one of the patterns. 7 finger bones arranged in a perfect circle, with a single tooth in the center. As I studied it, a breeze came out of the cave, cold air that tasted like metal and old death. "Jake, call this in. We need backup." He keyed his radio, but only static came back. The cave seemed to swallow all sound, creating a dead zone where nothing could get in or out. "No signal," he said. That's when we heard the voice. It came from deep inside the cave, echoing off stone walls. A woman's voice, speaking in Cherokee, counting slowly from 1 to 10 over and over again. But there was something wrong with it, something that made my skin crawl. "You understand any of that?" I asked Jake. He shook his head, but his face had gone pale. "My grandmother spoke some Cherokee. That doesn't sound right, like the words are backwards or something." The counting stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard footsteps, bare feet on stone, moving toward the cave entrance. Slow, deliberate steps that echoed like drum beats. "We should go," Jake said. I wanted to agree, but I thought about those 2 college kids. If they were in that cave, they needed help. And if they weren't, well, we still needed to know what had happened to them. "Stay behind me," I said, pulling out my weapon. Flashlight. The cave entrance was like stepping into another world. The air was at least 20 degrees colder, and our breath came out in white puffs. My light beam cut through the darkness, revealing smooth stone walls and a tunnel that stretched back into the mountain. The bones weren't just at the entrance. They lined the tunnel walls like decorations, arranged in spirals and geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Some were clearly animal bones, ribs, and skulls from deer and bears. But mixed in with them were human remains, lots of them. "Tom," Jake whispered, "how many people you think died in here?" "Too many," I said. We followed the tunnel deeper. The footsteps had stopped, but I could feel something watching us from the darkness ahead. My flashlight beam seemed weaker than it should be, like the cave was swallowing the light. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. I swept my light around and nearly dropped it. The walls were covered in bones. Floor to ceiling, hundreds of human skeletons arranged in intricate patterns. Skulls formed borders around empty spaces, where other bones created pictures, spirals and figures, and symbols that seemed to move in the shifting light. And in the center of the chamber stood a construction that made my blood run cold. It was shaped like a person, but built entirely from bones. Arm bones for arms, leg bones for legs, a rib cage for a torso, and 3 skulls stacked where the head should be. It stood 8 feet tall, perfectly balanced, impossible. "That ain't natural," Jake said. As if responding to his voice, the bone figure turned its 3 skulls toward us. Empty eye sockets fixed on my face, and I heard that woman's voice again, closer now. Asterisk Gado Hitsunievsti, asterisk. The bone figure raised one arm and pointed at Jake. When it did, Jake's radio crackled to life, but instead of static, we heard a man's voice, screaming for help in the distance. "That's one of the students," I said. Jake was already moving toward the sound, but I grabbed his arm. Something was very wrong here. The bone figure hadn't moved again, but I could feel intelligence behind those empty sockets. This wasn't just some weird natural formation. This thing was alive. The screaming led us deeper into the cave system, through tunnels that shouldn't have existed. My flashlight revealed passages carved with more Cherokee symbols, but these were different from the ones outside. These looked angry, like warnings scratched into the stone by desperate hands. Jake was breathing hard beside me. The cold was getting to him, and something else too. Every few minutes he'd stop and cock his head like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "You okay?" I asked. "Fine," he said, but his voice sounded strange, distant. We found the students in a chamber that opened up like a cathedral. They were alive but barely conscious, huddled together against the far wall. Their camping gear was scattered around them, but arranged in those same geometric patterns we'd been seeing. "Thank God," I said, rushing toward them. "We're rangers. We're here to help." The girl looked up at me with glassy eyes. "She's been teaching us," she whispered. "Teaching us the old ways." "Who's been teaching you?" "The bone weaver," the boy said. His voice was thick, like he was talking in his sleep. "She needs us to remember, needs us to help her finish her work." Jake had stopped behind me. When I turned to look at him, his eyes had the same glassy look as the students. "Jake, *Gadohitsunievsti*, he said in that woman's voice. The temperature in the chamber dropped another 20 degrees. My breath came out in thick white clouds, and frost started forming on the cave walls. The students began moving, slowly arranging themselves into positions that formed another geometric pattern. That's when she appeared. The bone weaver materialized out of the shadows like smoke becoming solid. She was tall, maybe 7 feet, and built from bones like the figure in the other chamber, but these bones moved like living flesh. Human skulls formed her face, constantly shifting and changing expression. Her arms were made from dozens of arm bones woven together like rope, and her hands had too many fingers, each one tipped with pointed ribs. When she spoke, her voice came from everywhere at once. *Atsila*, you have brought me strong bones. "What do you want?" I asked, backing away from her. "What was taken?" she said. "What was stolen when the soldiers came? My people's bones scattered to the 4 winds. I have spent 100 years gathering them back, building new bodies for the warriors who died defending our sacred places." The students and Jake were completely under her control now, moving in slow circles around the chamber, their footsteps making patterns in the dirt that looked like the bone arrangements. "The debt must be paid," the bone weaver continued. "Bone for bone, blood for blood. Your people took our sacred places, scattered our ancestors to build your roads and towns. Now I take your bones to rebuild what was lost." She gestured with one impossible hand, and Jake stopped moving. His eyes cleared for a moment, and he looked at me with terror. "Tom," he gasped. "She's inside my head. I can feel her pulling at my bones." The bone weaver laughed, a sound like wind through empty rib cages. "This one carries the blood of soldiers," she said. "His great-grandfather helped drive my people from these mountains. His bones will make fine warriors." Jake screamed as his body began to change. I could see his skeleton through his skin, glowing white-hot. His bones were trying to break free, to join the bone weaver's collection. "Stop," I shouted. "You cannot stop what was started long ago," she said. "But you can. Choose. Give me your bones willingly, and I will make your deaths quick. Fight me, and I will keep you conscious while I take you apart piece by piece." I looked around the chamber desperately. The walls were covered in more Cherokee symbols, but these were different. Protective symbols, maybe. My grandfather's stories came flooding back, not just about bone collectors, but about how to fight them. "You're not Cherokee," I said. The bone weaver's skull faces turned toward me. "I am Cherokee. I am Ayanna, medicine woman of the—" "No," I interrupted. "You were Cherokee, but Cherokee don't torture people." Cherokee don't steal bones from the living. You're something else now. Something twisted. Her bone hand swept toward me, and I felt invisible fingers trying to grab my ribs. Pain shot through my chest, but I forced myself to keep talking. My grandfather told me stories about the real Cherokee. They protected people. They healed. You're doing the opposite. Your grandfather knew nothing, she shrieked. But doubt flickered in her bone faces. The pain in my chest eased slightly. He knew enough, I said. He knew the old prayers, the ones that bind evil spirits. I didn't know any Cherokee prayers, but I remembered something my grandfather had taught me. A blessing he'd learned from a Cherokee friend. Words to speak over the dead to help them find peace. Asterisk, Gadoi Tsunievsti Nitsi asterisk, I said, hoping I was pronouncing it right. Asterisk at Sila Galvquoti Nigo Hilvi. Asterisk. The bone weaver recoiled like I'd hit her with fire. How do you know the death prayers? She demanded. Because someone taught them to me who cared about doing right by the dead, I said. Someone who understood that peace comes from letting go, not from taking revenge. Jake collapsed to his knees, his bones settling back into normal positions. The students stopped their ritual circling and looked around in confusion. But the bone weaver wasn't finished. Then, you will die knowing the truth, she snarled. Your grandfather's friend was my husband. The man who taught him those prayers watched soldiers burn our village. Watched them kill our children. He died calling for peace while his family's bones were scattered like seeds. The cave began to shake. Bones fell from the walls like rain, and in the distance I heard the sound of hundreds of feet marching. I have gathered enough, the bone weaver said. Tonight, when the moon is dark, my warriors will walk again. Every bone I have collected, every spirit I have bound, will rise to take back what was stolen. The chamber filled with the sound of rattling bones as her army began to wake. The bone warriors came through the cave walls like they were made of water instead of stone. Dozens of them, each one built from human remains but moving like living soldiers. They carried weapons made from sharpened ribs and jawbones shaped into clubs. Their empty eye sockets glowed with cold blue light. Jake was on his feet again, but barely. The bone weaver's attempt to claim his skeleton had left him weak and shaking. The two students huddled together, finally understanding the danger they were in. The tunnel, I shouted. Everyone back to the tunnel. We ran through the bone-decorated passages while the sound of marching feet echoed behind us. But when we reached the main tunnel, more warriors were waiting. They blocked our path to the outside, moving with ancient military precision. We were trapped. This way, Jake gasped, pointing to a side passage I hadn't noticed before. The passage was narrow and low, forcing us to crawl in places. Behind us, the bone warriors followed, their movements making a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. The bone weaver's voice echoed through the cave system, speaking in Cherokee, calling more spirits to her cause. The passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the first but with something different. Natural. Light filtered down from somewhere above, and the walls were covered with older symbols, protective markings that looked like they'd been carved by Cherokee hands centuries ago. This is a sacred place, the girl student whispered, a real one. She was right. I could feel it, a sense of peace that was completely different from the evil we'd left behind. This chamber had been blessed by Cherokee medicine people, protected by prayers and ceremonies older than any bones the bone weaver had collected. But even here, we weren't safe for long. The bone warriors appeared at the passage entrance, but something stopped them from entering. They pressed against an invisible barrier, their bone fingers clawing at the air. The protection won't hold forever, Jake said. He was leaning against the wall, his face pale. I can still feel her in my head. She's getting stronger. I studied the symbols on the walls, trying to remember everything my grandfather had told me about Cherokee traditions. Some of the markings looked familiar, not the Cherokee words I'd tried to speak earlier, but simpler symbols. Directions for ceremonies. Look, I said, pointing to a section of wall. It's instructions for a burial ritual. The boy student peered at the symbols. I can read some of this. It's about putting spirits to rest, about helping them find their path to the other world. That's what she needs, I realized. The bone weaver isn't evil because she wants to be. She's trapped between worlds, unable to move on because her burial was interrupted. The bone warriors were pressing harder against the barrier. Cracks appeared in the air itself, spider webbing out from where they touched. How do we help her? The girl asked. The ritual, I said. But it has to be done right, with the proper words and the proper sacrifice. Jake looked at me with understanding in his eyes. Someone has to stay behind. Someone has to complete the ceremony, while the others get out. No, I said, there has to be another way. There isn't. Jake's voice was getting weaker. She's still connected to me. I can feel her pulling, trying to use me as an anchor to this world. If I don't break that connection, she'll follow us out of the mountain. The barrier cracked wider. The first bone warrior squeezed through, its ribcage scraping against stone. The words, Jake said urgently, "Do you remember the rest of the prayer your grandfather taught you?" I closed my eyes, reaching back through 16 years of memories to find my grandfather's voice. Slowly, the words came back to me. Asterisk gadohi tsuni ivsti nitsi. Atsila galvquodi nigohilvi. Unole tanvi nigedv. Asterisk, the bone warrior stopped moving. The blue light in its eye sockets flickered. What does it mean? I asked. The boy student was reading the wall symbols frantically. Rest now, warrior. Your people remember your sacrifice. Walk the star path home. Jake stepped forward, placing his hands on the symbols. Tom, when I start the ceremony, you take the students and run. Don't look back. Jake, this is my choice, he said. My family's blood helped drive her people from these mountains. Maybe this can balance the scales. The bone warriors were pouring through the barrier now, filling the chamber. But as Jake began to speak the Cherokee words, they slowed, then stopped. The bone weaver herself appeared among them, her bone faces twisted with rage and confusion. What are you doing? She demanded. What should have been done long ago, Jake said. I'm helping you go home. He continued the ceremony, his voice growing stronger with each word. The Cherokee symbols on the walls began to glow with warm golden light, completely different from the cold blue fire in the warrior's eyes. The bone weaver screamed, but it wasn't a sound of anger anymore. It was grief, the cry of someone who had been lost for too long and was finally being shown the way. My people, she whispered. I can see them. They're waiting. One by one, the bone warriors began to fall apart. Not collapsing, but coming apart gently, their bones settling to the cave floor like leaves. The blue light in their eyes faded to starlight, then disappeared entirely. The bone weaver looked at Jake with faces that were no longer made of skulls, but of light and memory. Thank you, she said in a voice like wind through trees. Thank you for remembering. She reached out with hands that were no longer bone, and touched Jake's forehead. He gasped, his back arching, and for a moment I thought she was killing him. Instead, she was healing him. The connection between them broke like a chain snapping. Jake collapsed to his knees, but when he looked up, his eyes were clear and his own again. The bone weaver smiled an expression of peace I'll never forget, and dissolved into golden light that rose toward the chamber ceiling and disappeared. The cave began to shake, not from supernatural forces this time, but from good old-fashioned geological instability. The ceremonies and spiritual energy had weakened the limestone, and the whole system was starting to collapse. Now we run, I said. We made it out of the cave system, with minutes to spare. The whole mountainside shuddered as tons of limestone collapsed, sealing the tunnels forever. The sound echoed across the Cherokee National Forest like thunder, and I knew that whatever had happened in those caves would stay buried. The students didn't remember much, just getting lost in the fog and being found by rangers. Their notebooks were blank, all the bone drawings gone like they'd never existed. The official report listed them as suffering from exposure and hypothermia, which was close enough to the truth. Jake and I never talked about what happened, at least not officially, but something had changed in both of us. Jake started having dreams, where he spoke Cherokee, conversations with people he'd never met about things that happened before he was born. And I found myself drawn to the Cherokee Nation Cultural Center, learning about the real history of these mountains. 3 months later, I got a call from the Cherokee Nation's Cultural Preservation Office. They wanted to thank me for reporting the cave-in and helping protect an important burial site. They'd been looking for that particular cave for decades, following oral histories about a medicine woman named Ayanna who'd disappeared during the forced removal. She was trying to protect the burial grounds when the soldiers came, the tribal elder told me. Her family thought she'd been taken to the internment camps, but she never arrived. Now we know why. He gave me a small leather pouch filled with sacred tobacco and instructions for a blessing ceremony. "For the next time you find disturbed graves," he said, "some spirits just need help finding their way home." I keep that pouch in my ranger gear, along with a piece of paper where I've written down the Cherokee burial prayers. I've had to use them 3 times since Backbone Rock, always in places where old graves have been disturbed, always where people have gone missing or reported strange things. Jake transferred to a desk job 6 months later. He said the mountains felt different to him now, like he could hear too much when the wind blew through the trees. But sometimes, when we meet for coffee, he'll mention dreams where Cherokee warriors thank him for helping their medicine woman find peace. The anthropology department at the University of Tennessee still sends students to study Cherokee sites, but never to Backbone Rock. That whole section of the mountain is marked as geologically unstable, off-limits to everyone except tribal representatives who come sometimes to perform private ceremonies. I've been a ranger for 22 years now, and I've learned that the mountains have long memories. The Cherokee called these peaks home for thousands of years before Europeans arrived, and their spirits are still here, woven into the stone and soil and streams. Most of those spirits are peaceful, content to watch over the land they loved in life. But sometimes graves get disturbed. Sometimes ancient boundaries get crossed, and sometimes the dead need help finding their way to whatever comes next. If you're ever hiking in Cherokee country and you find bones arranged in patterns, if you hear counting in a language you don't understand, if the forest goes silent and the air tastes like metal and old death, leave immediately. Don't try to investigate. Don't take pictures. Just walk away and find a park ranger who knows the old prayers. Some debts can only be paid in bone and blood, but sometimes, if you know the right words and you're willing to help instead of harm, you can help balance the scales in a different way. The dead don't always rest easy when their sacred places are disturbed, but they can find peace if someone remembers their names and honors their sacrifice. Remember that, and the mountains will remember you too. Asterisk, author's note. This story is fiction, but it's based on real Cherokee history and genuine respect for Native American spiritual traditions. The Cherokee Nation did suffer forced removal in 1838, and many sacred sites were destroyed or desecrated. The prayers mentioned are not real Cherokee words, as I am not Cherokee and would not presume to use actual sacred language inappropriately. Asterisk. My name is Samuel Garrett, and I've been a park ranger for 13 winters now. People think that's not very long, but 13 winters in the cranberry wilderness will age you fast. These mountains don't forgive mistakes, especially when the snow starts falling. I used to work in the coal mines before this job. Spent 8 years underground, crawling through tunnels that felt like they wanted to swallow you whole. My daddy worked those same mines, and his daddy before him. But after what happened to my crew in the cave-in of '81, I needed to see the sky every day. The Forest Service was hiring, and mountains above ground felt safer than mountains below. That was before I learned that some mountains keep their secrets in both places. January 15th, 1983. The worst blizzard in 20 years was howling through West Virginia, and I was supposed to be home with my wife, Sarah, watching the snow pile up against our windows. Instead, I was strapping on snowshoes at 4 a.m. because 2 college kids from Pittsburgh hadn't checked in from their winter camping trip. Probably just holed up somewhere smart, my supervisor, Dan, said over the radio. But their parents are raising hell, and the state wants us to check. The kids, Mike and Jennifer, had permits for a 3-day trip in the Cranberry River Valley. Good kids, according to their paperwork. Eagle Scouts. Knew what they were doing. But knowing what you're doing doesn't mean much when Mother Nature decides to throw a tantrum. I loaded my pack with enough gear to survive 3 days if things went bad. Emergency shelter, propane heater, first aid kit, enough food for 4 people. My old mining helmet with the headlamp. You never know when you might need to go underground in these mountains. The abandoned mines from the 1,920 are everywhere, hidden under 60 years of brush and snow. The wind was screaming when I started up the trail. Snow came down so hard I could barely see my snowshoes. My breath froze before it left my mouth, and the cold bit through my wool coat like it had teeth. This was the kind of weather that killed people. The kind that made the old-timers tell stories about things that came out when the snow got deep enough. Wendigo stories, my grandmother used to call them. Tales about people who got so hungry, so desperate in the deep winter, that they ate things they shouldn't eat, did things they shouldn't do, and changed into something that wasn't quite human anymore. I never believed those stories. Wendigo was just what happened when winter drove people crazy with hunger and cold. Nothing supernatural about it, just the human mind breaking under pressure. But as I climbed higher into the mountains that morning, with the wind howling like something alive and angry, I started to understand why the old stories existed. There was something about deep winter in these mountains that felt wrong. Like the cold wasn't just weather, it was something that wanted to get inside you. The trail the kids were supposed to take followed the old mining road up to Cranberry River. It was a good route in summer, with clear campsites and fresh water. But in winter, it turned into something else. The mining road cut through a valley that locals called Hunger Hollow, named for the miners who got trapped there during the blizzard of 1923. 23 men went into those mines and never came out. The company said it was a cave-in, but my grandfather told a different story. He was the mine foreman back then, and he never talked about what really happened. All he ever said was that some hungers never die, and some doors should stay closed. I was thinking about Grandpa's warnings as I reached the first marker where the kids should have camped. Nothing there but wind-blown snow and trees bent like old men. Their trail was already covered, but I found something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Leading away from the campsite toward the old mine entrance. The prints were strange, too big to be the college kids, but shaped like human feet. And they were filled with ice that looked black in my headlamp beam. Like the cold that made them was colder than normal cold. I followed the tracks for 100 yards before they disappeared at the mouth of the old Hunger Hollow mine. The entrance was supposed to be sealed, but the boards had been torn away from the inside. Beyond the opening, I could see nothing but darkness that seemed to swallow my light. That's when I heard it. A sound like metal hitting stone, echoing up from deep underground. Slow and steady, like someone working with a pickaxe. But the mine had been abandoned for 60 years. I stood at that mine entrance for 5 minutes, listening to the pickaxe sounds coming from below. My ranger training said to call for backup, but my radio was just static. The storm was too thick for signals to get through. The sound stopped. Then I heard something worse. A voice calling up from the darkness, weak and desperate. "Help us, please." It was a young woman's voice. Had to be Jennifer. Every smart part of my brain told me to wait, to go back and get help when the storm cleared. But those kids had been missing for 2 days already, and if they were trapped underground in this cold, I checked my gear one more time. Headlamp, backup flashlight, rope, first aid kit. I wasn't equipped for a mine rescue, but I'd spent 8 years underground. I knew how to move through tunnels without getting lost. The mine entrance smelled wrong. Not just old and musty, like abandoned places usually smell. This was different, like meat that had been left out too long, mixed with the metallic smell of old blood. But there was something else underneath it. Something that made my stomach growl even though I'd eaten breakfast an hour ago. Hunger. The smell of deep, desperate hunger. I started down the main tunnel, following the wooden brust. Support beams with my light. The mine was in better shape than it should be. The timbers looked old, but solid. The floor was clear of debris, like someone had been maintaining it. 20 feet in, I found the first sign of the college kids. A blue hiking sock, frozen to the tunnel floor. Then, a granola bar wrapper. Then, something that made me stop dead. Scratches in the tunnel wall. Deep gouges, like someone had clawed at the stone with their fingernails. Or with something sharp. The scratches formed letters, spelled out in desperate, shaky marks. "Don't eat the meat." My hands were shaking as I read those words. Not from the cold, from something else. That's when I heard the pickaxe sounds again. Closer now. Coming from deeper in the mine, I followed the sound through 3 more tunnel branches. The mine was bigger than I thought, with passages that weren't on any of the old survey maps. Some of the tunnels sloped down so steep I had to use my rope to keep from sliding. Others branched off into darkness so complete my headlamp couldn't find the end. And it was getting colder. Not just winter cold. This was the kind of cold that hurt your bones. The kind that made your breath come out in white clouds so thick you could barely see through them. 50 feet down the main shaft, I found Jennifer's backpack. It was ripped open, and all the food was gone. Every last crumb. But the weird thing was how it was eaten. The packages weren't just opened, they were shredded, like something with sharp teeth had torn them apart in a feeding frenzy. Next to the backpack was a camping stove. Still warm. Someone had been cooking something recently. But there was no food left to cook. That's when I found the first bone. It was small, maybe from a rabbit or a squirrel. But it had been cracked open and all the marrow sucked out. There were teeth marks on it. Human-sized teeth marks. I was staring at that bone when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, careful steps. Like someone trying not to make noise. I turned around fast, my headlamp cutting through the darkness. Nothing there but empty tunnel. But I could hear breathing. Ragged, hungry breathing that echoed off the stone walls. Jennifer? Mike? It's okay. I'm here to help you. The breathing stopped. Then a voice answered from the darkness ahead of me. A man's voice this time, but wrong somehow. Too deep. Too hollow. So hungry. I've been so hungry for so long. I started walking toward the voice, my hand on the radio, even though I knew it wouldn't work down here. The tunnel curved to the left, and my light caught something moving in the shadows. A person. Sitting against the tunnel wall. It was Mike, the college kid. I could tell from his red jacket. But something was wrong with him. He was too thin. Way too thin. Like he hadn't eaten in weeks instead of days. Mike? I'm Ranger Garrett. I'm here to get you out. He looked up at me, and I saw his eyes. They were wild and desperate, like an animal's eyes, and hungry. So hungry it scared me. She said we had to eat it. Said it was the only way to stay warm. But it made us. It changed us. Where's Jennifer, Mike? He pointed deeper into the mine with a hand that was nothing but skin and bones. She's with them now. With the others. They showed her how to hunt. What others, Mike? What are you talking about? He smiled, and I saw his teeth. They were longer than they should be. Sharper. The miners, the ones who never left, they've been waiting so long for fresh meat. That's when I heard the scream. It came from deep in the mine, echoing through the tunnels like the sound of someone in terrible pain. But there was something else in that scream. Something that sounded almost hungry. Mike stood up, moving wrong, like his joints didn't work right anymore. They're cooking now, he said. Cooking the fresh meat. You should come. You should eat with us. I backed away from him, my heart hammering. Mike, you're sick. You need help. Let me get you out of here. He shook his head, still smiling that terrible smile. Can't leave. Too hungry to leave. But don't worry. They'll make you understand. They'll make you hungry too. That's when I ran. I ran through those tunnels like the devil himself was chasing me. Behind me, I could hear Mike laughing. Not a human laugh. Something else. Something that had been human once, but wasn't anymore. The mine was a maze. Tunnels branched off in every direction, some leading up, some leading down into darkness so deep my light couldn't find the bottom. I took 3 wrong turns before I found a passage that looked familiar. But when I stopped to catch my breath, I realized I was lost. The tunnel I was in didn't match anything I remembered. The wooden support beams were different, older, and carved into them were symbols that made my skin crawl. Not letters or numbers, something else, something that hurt to look at. That's when I heard the pickaxe sounds again. But now they were coming from all directions, like a whole crew of miners working in the tunnels around me. I checked my watch. I'd been underground for 2 hours. The storm outside was probably getting worse, but down here, I couldn't tell. Time moved different in the mines. I learned that during my coal mining days, you could go down for what felt like an hour and come back up to find the whole day was gone. But this felt worse than that. This felt like time was stretching, getting thick like cold honey. I started walking again, trying to follow my own footprints back to the entrance, but the footprints led me to a chamber I'd never seen before. A big open space with mining equipment scattered around like it had been abandoned yesterday. Pickaxes, shovels, mining helmets with carbide lamps still attached, and in the center of the chamber, a fire pit with fresh fire pit flames, coals still glowing. Something was cooking over those coals, something that smelled like meat. I didn't want to look. Every smart part of my brain told me to turn around and run. But I had to know. I had to see. It was a backpack, Mike's backpack, and it was full of something that wasn't camping supplies. I heard footsteps behind me and spun around. 3 figures stood at the entrance to the chamber. They wore old mining clothes and carried pickaxes. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but I could see their eyes, glowing like coals in the darkness. "You shouldn't be here," one of them said. His voice sounded like gravel falling down a shaft. "The mine is closed," said another. "Has been closed since 1923. The third one stepped forward, and I saw his face in my headlamp beam. It was human, but wrong. Too thin, too hungry. Like Mike, but worse. Like he'd been hungry for a lot longer. "But you're here now?" he said. "And we've been so hungry. So very hungry." I backed away from them, my hand fumbling for something in my pack. Anything I could use as a weapon. "I'm just looking for the college kids. Just let me take them and go." The miners laughed. It sounded like stones grinding together. "The girl is with us now," the first one said. "She understands. She's learned to hunt. And the boy will understand soon," said the second. "When the hunger takes him completely." "Just like you will," said the third. "When you get hungry enough, when the cold gets deep enough, you'll understand why we do what we do." That's when I heard Jennifer's voice, calling from somewhere in the darkness beyond the chamber. "Help me, please help me." But there was something wrong with her voice too, something that made my skin crawl, like she was smiling while she said it. The miners stepped aside, gesturing toward the tunnel where her voice had come from. "Go ahead," one of them said. "She's waiting for you." Waiting to share what I taught her. I had 2 choices: follow Jennifer's voice deeper into the mine, or try to get past 3 dead miners with pickaxes. I chose the voice. The tunnel sloped down sharply, and the air got colder with every step. My breath was coming out in clouds so thick I could barely see. And the smell was getting stronger. That hunger smell. That smell of meat and desperation and something else I couldn't name. I found Jennifer in a chamber at the bottom of the slope. She was sitting by another fire pit, stirring something in a metal pot with a mining tool. "Jennifer, I'm here to help you." She looked up at me and smiled. Her face was thin and pale, but her eyes were bright. Too bright. "Ranger Garrett," she said. "I was hoping you'd come. I was hoping you'd want to eat with us." She gestured to the pot. The smell coming from it made my stomach turn and growl at the same time. "What is that, Jennifer?" "Dinner," she said. "Fresh meat. The miners taught me how to cook it right, how to make it last." I stepped closer and looked into the pot. What I saw there made me understand why the old stories talked about Wendigos. Why my grandfather never talked about what happened in the mines. It wasn't deer meat in that pot. "Jennifer, you need to come with me. Right now, we need to get you help." She shook her head, still stirring. "Can't leave. Too hungry to leave." "But that's okay. You can stay too. The miners will teach you like they taught me. They'll teach you how to hunt, how to feed the hunger that never goes away." She stood up, and I saw how thin she'd gotten, like she was starving even while she was eating. They've been waiting so long for fresh people to come to the mine. Waiting since 1923. And they're so grateful when someone finally comes to visit. Behind me, I heard footsteps. The miners were following me down. I was trapped. But then I remembered something my grandfather used to say. Something about the mines. Something about why he never talked about what happened. Some doors should stay closed, he used to say. And some hungers are too big to feed. But he also said something else. Something about prayers. About how the miners used to pray before they went underground. How they blessed themselves against the darkness. I didn't know if it would work. But I was out of other options. I pulled out my grandfather's old mining helmet from my pack, the one he'd given me when I started working underground. And I started to pray. Not fancy church prayers. Just the simple blessing he'd taught me. The one miners used to say to keep them safe underground. "Lord, keep us safe in the darkness. Bring us back to the light." The miners behind me stopped walking. Jennifer dropped her stirring spoon. "What are you doing?" she whispered. I kept praying, louder now. "Lord, keep us safe from the hunger that never dies. Keep us safe from the cold that steals souls." The fire in the pit started to flicker. The coals were turning from red to black. And somewhere in the darkness, something roared with rage and hunger that sounded like it had been building for 60 years. The mine shook when that thing roared. Not like an earthquake, like something huge and hungry was thrashing around in the tunnels below us. Jennifer screamed and fell to her knees. The pot of meat spilled over, hissing as it hit the cold stone floor. And I could see something happening to her face. The thin, hungry look was fading. Her eyes were becoming normal again. What did I do?" she whispered. "Oh God, what did I do?" The miners behind me were backing away from my grandfather's helmet and my prayers. But they weren't leaving. They were angry. 60 years of anger and hunger, focused on me. "You can't stop us," one of them said. "We've been here too long, fed too many. The hunger is part of the mountain now." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about some miners who died in 1923. This was about my grandfather, about what he did, about why he never talked about it. I looked at the lead miner, and I saw something familiar in his face. Something that looked like family. "You're them," I said. "You're the 23 miners. The ones who got trapped." "Trapped." He laughed, and the sound echoed through the tunnels like breaking glass. "We weren't trapped, boy. We were sealed in. Sealed in by your grandfather when we got too hungry. When we started eating things we shouldn't eat." The truth hit me like a cave-in. Grandfather hadn't just been the mine foreman. He'd been the one who made the choice. When the miners got snowed in during the blizzard of 1923, when they ran out of food, when they started changing, he'd sealed the mine entrance, left them to die rather than let them get out. "He saved the town," the miner continued, "but he damned us, left us here to starve, left us here to become what we became." "And now," said another miner, "his grandson comes to visit. How perfect, how very perfect." They started walking toward me again, their pickaxes scraping against the stone floor. I grabbed Jennifer's arm and pulled her to her feet. "Can you walk?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "The things I did, the things they made me do." "Not now," I said. "Run now, cry later." We ran deeper into the mine, away from the miners. But I knew we were going the wrong way. Going deeper instead of up toward the entrance. The tunnels were getting colder, and I could hear more footsteps behind us. Not just the 3 miners, more of them, all 23 maybe. The tunnel opened into a huge chamber I'd never seen before. It was old, older than the mining operation, like it had been here before humans ever came to these mountains. And in the center of the chamber was a pit. A deep, black pit that my headlamp couldn't find the bottom of. But I could, to hear something down there. Something moving around in the darkness. "The first hunger?" Jennifer whispered. "They told me about it. The thing that was here before the miners came. The thing that taught them how to change." The miners appeared at the tunnel entrance behind us, all of them now. 23 figures in old mining clothes, carrying tools that looked like they'd been sharpened on bones. "This is where it started," the lead miner said. "Where the mountain's hunger lives, where we learned what real hunger means." They spread out around the chamber, blocking every exit. "Your grandfather tried to stop us," another miner said. "Tried to seal us away. But you can't seal away hunger. It finds a way. It always finds a way." I was still holding my grandfather's helmet, still praying. But the miners weren't backing away anymore. They were getting stronger, fed by Jennifer's time with them, fed by Mike's change, fed by 60 years of waiting. "There's only one way this ends," the lead miner said. "You join us, or you feed us. Either way, the hunger gets what it wants." That's when I realized something. The helmet wasn't just a helmet. It was a tool. And the prayers weren't just prayers. They were instructions. My grandfather hadn't sealed the mine to trap the miners. He'd sealed it to contain something else. Something bigger. Something that had been in these mountains long before humans arrived. The thing in the pit. I walked to the edge of the pit and looked down. My headlamp beam disappeared into darkness that felt alive, hungry, ancient. "Grandfather didn't seal you in," I said to the miners. "He sealed it in. And you've been feeding it for 60 years. The miners stopped walking. "You think you're the hunters," I continued. "But you're just food, just like Mike, just like Jennifer, just like everyone who comes down here." I held up the helmet, and now I could see what was really carved into it. Not just my grandfather's initials, symbols, protection symbols, instructions for sealing things that shouldn't be unsealed. "He left me the key," I said, "the key to finishing what he started." The thing in the pit roared again, and this time I felt it in my bones, felt it in my soul. Felt the hunger it carried, cold and ancient and endless. The miners rushed toward me, pickaxes raised. I put on my grandfather's helmet and jumped into the pit. The fall was longer than I expected, long enough to think about Sarah waiting at home, long enough to think about the college kids who just wanted to go camping, long enough to pray one last prayer. Lord, some hungers are too big to feed. Help me close this door. I hit bottom hard, but not as hard as I should have. Something caught me. Something that felt like cold hands and hot breath and teeth as long as fingers. The thing in the pit wasn't just hungry, it was hunger itself. Older than the mountains, older than humans. The kind of thing that taught people to eat things they shouldn't eat, to become things they shouldn't become. It spoke to me without words. Promised me everything if I'd just let it out. Let it feed. Let it turn the whole world into one big, endless hunger. But I had my grandfather's helmet, and I had his prayers, and I had his guilt, passed down through the family like an old debt that finally needed to be paid. I pulled the helmet's carbide lamp off and smashed it against the pit wall. The calcium carbide inside mixed with water from the melting ice and started to burn. Started to burn very hot. Hot enough to melt metal. Hot enough to collapse tunnels. The thing in the pit screamed as the fire spread, not just from the flame, but from what the flame represented. Light in the darkness, hope in the hunger, an end to 60 years of feeding. Above me, I could hear the miners screaming too, and the mountain itself, groaning like it was in pain. The pit walls started to crumble. The whole chamber started to shake. I climbed up those pit walls like my life depended on it, because it did. The ancient thing at the bottom was burning, but it wasn't dying easy. Every foot I climbed, I could feel it reaching for me with something that wasn't quite hands. When I got to the top, Jennifer was waiting. She grabbed my arms and helped pull me out. "The whole mine's coming down," she said. "We need to get out." We ran through tunnels that were collapsing behind us, rock and timber falling like rain. The mountain was shrugging off the infection that had been growing inside it for 60 years. The miners were gone. Not dead, they'd been dead for decades. Just gone. Released. The hunger that had been keeping them here was burning up with the thing in the pit. We found Mike at the mine entrance. He was himself again, thin and scared, but human. The Wendigo change was fading as the source of it died. "I remember everything," he said as we stumbled out into the blizzard. "All of it, what I did, what I ate." "Don't," I told him. "Some things are better forgotten." The storm was ending. First time in 3 days I could see stars. We made it back to the ranger station as the sun came up. Jennifer and Mike were hospitalized for severe malnutrition and hypothermia. The official report said they'd gotten lost and trapped in a snow cave, surviving on minimal food until I found them. Nobody asked why they were so thin. Nobody asked about the mine. 2 weeks later, there was an earthquake that collapsed the Hunger Hollow mine completely, sealed it under 50 tons of rock. The geological survey said it was natural settling from the storm. I knew better. I also knew my grandfather's story now. Found his journal in the helmet case after I got home. The real story of what happened in 1923. The miners hadn't just gotten trapped by snow. They'd found something down there. Something that taught them new kinds of hunger. And when they started coming back to town, changed. My grandfather had to choose between 23 men and everyone else. He chose everyone else, and spent the rest of his life carrying that guilt. The journal had other stories too. Other mines and other mountains. Other hungry things that sometimes got loose. A whole network of places where the earth held old appetites. I keep the journal now. Keep the helmet. Keep watch. Because Jennifer was right about one thing. You can't really kill hunger that old. You can only seal it away and hope the seals hold. I've been back to Hunger Hollow 3 times since that winter. Just to check. The collapse is holding. No sounds from underground. No strange cold spots. No missing hikers. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling through the mountains, I think I can hear something. Something deep underground, waiting. Mike and Jennifer never went camping again. They moved to Florida, where it's warm and there aren't any mines. They send me Christmas cards every year, but they never mention what happened. Some hungers are better left unfed, even the hunger for truth. Sarah asks me sometimes why I keep working the mountains, why I don't take that desk job the state keeps offering. I tell her somebody needs to watch the old places, Somebody needs to know which doors should stay closed. What I don't tell her is that I can feel them sometimes. Other places, like Hunger Hollow, other spots where the mountain's appetite gets too strong. Other mines and caves and deep places where things wait that shouldn't be waiting. My grandfather sealed one door. But there are more. And someday, someone's going to open one of them. When that happens, I'll be ready. With prayers and fire and whatever else it takes to keep the old hungers buried. Because some things are too hungry to live and too dangerous to die. And in these mountains, somebody always has to stand watch. Asterisk. Stay away from abandoned mines in winter. Some hungers never die, and the mountains hold on to old sins. If you hear pickaxe sounds from empty shafts, it's not the wind. The dead don't always stay buried, especially when they died angry and hungry. Respect the places where people suffered, or you might join them. Asterisk. My name is Daniel Whitlock, and I've been a forest ranger for 19 years. I know these Virginia mountains like the back of my hand. Every trail, every cave, every weird rock formation that makes tourists stop and take pictures. I used to be a geology professor before this job, so when people ask me about the strange stone circles up in Mount Rogers, I always give them the same answer. They're just old Cherokee astronomy sites. Nothing magical about them. I wish I'd been right. It started in September, right around the equinox. I was up in the Grayson Highlands checking on some research sites when Dr. Sarah Chen from the university called my radio. Her archaeology team had been studying the stone circles for 3 months, and she sounded worried. "Daniel, we need you up here. Something's not right with the stones." I hiked the 8 miles to their main site, a perfect circle of 12 granite pillars about 7 feet tall each. The Cherokee called this place where stones speak, but I'd always figured that was just old stories. When I got there, Sarah was staring at her equipment like it had betrayed her. "Look at this," she said, showing me readings on her tablet. "Yesterday, these stones were exactly where we mapped them. Today, 3 of them have moved." I looked at the stones. They looked fine to me. How much did they move? 6 inches. Each one rotated exactly 30 degrees clockwise. "Maybe your measurements were off." She shook her head. "Daniel, these stones weigh 4 tons each. You'd need a crane to move them. And look at the ground underneath." I knelt down and saw what she meant. The grass under the stones was still green and perfect, like the stones had never been there at all. But the new spots where they sat now were already pressed flat. That's when I heard it for the first time. A low humming sound, so quiet I almost missed it. It seemed to come from the stones themselves. "You hear that?" I asked. Sarah nodded. "Started this morning. Gets louder when we get close to the center of the circle." I walked to the middle, and the humming got stronger. It felt like standing too close to a power line, but there were no power lines for 20 miles. The sound made my teeth ache and my ears pop. "Any ideas?" Sarah asked. I pulled out my seismograph to check for underground activity. Maybe a small earthquake had shifted things around, but the readings were normal. Actually, they were too normal. The mountains always have tiny tremors, little shifts in the rock. But here, everything was perfectly still. "I'll camp here tonight," I told Sarah. "Maybe I'll figure out what's going on." After her team left, I set up my tent outside the circle and made dinner on my camp stove. The sun was setting, and fog was rolling in from the valleys below. The humming got louder as it got darker. I tried to radio the ranger station, but got nothing but static. My phone had no signal either. That wasn't unusual up here, but tonight it felt different. Like something was blocking the signals on purpose. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of stones grinding against each other. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent. The stones were moving, not fast, but steady, like they were being pushed by invisible hands. As I watched, frozen in place, they rotated in their spots, turning to face different directions. The humming was so loud now it made my whole body vibrate. I started to back away, but then I saw something that made my blood turn cold. There were people standing between the stones, tall figures made of moving rock and shadow, their faces blank but somehow watching me. They didn't walk, they flowed, like water pretending to be human. One of them turned toward me, and I heard a voice inside my head. Not words, but feelings and images. It showed me the mountains as they were thousands of years ago, covered in forests that stretched forever. It showed me Cherokee people coming to this place to talk with the stone spirits, asking for protection from earthquakes and landslides. The voice was sad and angry at the same time. It showed me modern cities built in places that should be left alone, roads cut through sacred sites, and worst of all, the stone circles being disturbed by people who didn't understand what they were really for. Then it showed me something that made me sick with fear. A massive landslide, bigger than anything these mountains had ever seen. I saw the valley below buried under millions of tons of rock and dirt. I saw my daughter Emma's house, right in the path of destruction. The vision ended, and the stone figures faded away like morning mist. But the message was clear. Something terrible was coming, and these ancient guardians were trying to warn me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I called in sick and drove straight to the university library. If these stone circles were really some kind of warning system, I needed to understand how they worked. I spent hours reading everything I could find about Cherokee legends and geological surveys of the area. Most of it was the usual academic stuff, but one old journal from the 1800s caught my attention. A Cherokee elder named Joseph Ridge had talked to a researcher about the stone singers. According to Ridge, the stone circles weren't just for ceremonies. They were guardians that could feel earthquakes coming months ahead of time. When danger was near, they would sing warnings and move themselves into protective positions. The Cherokee would listen to their songs and know when to move their villages to safer ground. The researcher had written it off as superstition, but now I wasn't so sure. I drove back to the mountains that afternoon with a trunk full of equipment. Sarah's team had gone back to town for the weekend, so I had the site to myself. I set up my seismograph, acoustic sensors, and cameras all around the circle. The humming started again as soon as the sun went down. This time I was ready. My equipment picked up vibrations coming from deep underground, but they weren't random. They had a pattern, like a heartbeat or breathing. The acoustic sensors showed sounds below human hearing range, but when I played them back at higher speeds, they almost sounded like singing. That's when I noticed something new. All the animals had left the area. No birds, no squirrels, no insects. Even the plants looked wrong, like they were leaning away from the stone circle. At 11:47 p.m., my cameras caught something impossible. The stones weren't just humming now, they were glowing with a soft blue light that seemed to come from inside the rock itself. And between the stones, those same shadowy figures were back, but clearer this time. I could see that they weren't exactly human-shaped. They were tall and thin, with too many joints in their arms and legs. Their faces had holes where eyes should be, but I could feel them watching me anyway. One of them glided toward my equipment, and every electronic device I had started going crazy. Numbers scrolled across screens faster than I could read them. Then, all at once, everything went silent. The figure pointed at me, then at the ground. Images flooded my mind again, but this time they were sharper and more detailed. I saw the mountains millions of years ago, when they were young and still growing. I saw the first stone spirits born from the pressure of shifting rock and the songs of underground rivers. They had been guardians from the very beginning, keeping the delicate balance that held these ancient peaks together. But something was wrong now. Human activity had disrupted the natural patterns. A dam built 30 years ago had changed underground water flow. New roads had cracked the bedrock in dangerous ways. And worst of all, a new shopping mall built in the valley had the foundation drilled right through a crucial fault line. The stone spirits were losing their ability to hold everything together. A catastrophic slide was building pressure, and they calculated it would happen in exactly 71 hours and 36 minutes. The vision showed me the destruction again. This time I could see specific details. Emma's elementary school, where she taught second grade, would be buried under 60 feet of rock. The hospital, where my ex-wife worked as a nurse, the retirement home where my dad lived, all of it would be gone in minutes. Thousands of people would die, and there was no way to evacuate them without proof that nobody would believe. When the vision ended, the stone figure was standing right in front of me. It reached out with one rocky finger and touched my forehead. Pain exploded through my skull like lightning. I felt something moving around inside my brain, examining my memories, testing my knowledge of geology and mountain systems. It was looking for something specific. Finally, it found what it wanted. The creature pulled back, and I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. But something had changed. I could feel the mountains around me in a way I never had before. Every tiny shift in the rock, every drop of water moving through underground channels, every stress point building toward failure. And I could feel the massive instability growing beneath the valley. The creature was right. Time was running out. The stone figures faded away as dawn approached, but their message echoed in my head. Asterisk, help us fix what was broken, or watch everything you love be destroyed. The asterisk, I spent the next day trying to convince people about the coming disaster. Nobody believed me. Daniel, you're talking about ancient rock spirits, said my supervisor, Jim Martinez. Do you hear how crazy that sounds? I tried explaining the geological evidence I'd gathered, but my readings were so strange that other geologists just assumed my equipment was broken. The seismic patterns didn't match anything in the textbooks. The underground water flow made no sense according to normal physics. By Tuesday evening, I was desperate. Emma called while I was driving back to the stone circles. Dad, are you okay? Jim said you've been acting weird. Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Take a vacation. Leave town for a few days. What? Why? I couldn't tell her the truth. There might be some geological instability in the valley. Just trust me. Dad, you're scaring me. Please, Em, just go visit your mom in Richmond. Take the kids and go tonight. She was quiet for a moment. Are you having another breakdown, like after the divorce? That hit me hard. 3 years ago, when Sarah left me and took Emma with her, I'd had what doctors called a stress-related episode. I'd started seeing patterns in rock formations that weren't there, convinced that the mountains were trying to tell me something. It had taken 6 months of therapy to get back to normal. This isn't like that, I said. This is real. But I could hear the doubt in her voice when she said goodbye. When I got back to the stone circle, I found Sarah Chen's research camp in chaos. Tents were flattened, equipment was scattered everywhere, and there was no sign of the team. I called out, but got no answer. Then I saw the message spelled out in stones near the center of the circle. 7 are chosen. My blood went cold. Sarah's team had 7 people. I found them an hour later, arranged in a perfect line at the bottom of a cliff about half a mile away. They were all unconscious but breathing, lying on soft grass without a scratch on them. It was like they'd been gently placed there. When the rescue teams arrived, none of the researchers could remember what had happened. The last thing they recalled was setting up camp that morning. Doctors found nothing wrong with them except for what one described as unusual brain activity consistent with deep meditation. But I knew the truth. The stone spirits had removed them from the area to keep them safe from what was coming. That night, alone at the circle, I faced the spirits directly. "What do you want from me?" I shouted at the humming stones. The answer came as images and feelings flooding my mind. They showed me the network of stone circles scattered throughout the mountains. There were dozens of them, all connected by underground channels of energy that helped stabilize the entire region. But several key circles had been damaged or destroyed over the years. Without the full network, the remaining spirits couldn't generate enough power to prevent the coming slide. They needed someone who understood both the old ways and the new science. Someone who could help them rebuild the broken connections. They needed me. The lead spirit, taller and more solid-looking than the others, approached slowly. When it touched my forehead this time, the pain was less, but the visions were stronger. I saw what I had to do. There were 3 damaged circles within 50 miles. Each one needed to be repaired using a combination of precise stone placement and harmonic resonance. The spirits would guide me, but I had to provide the human knowledge of geology and engineering. "How long do we have?" I asked. Images of the moon phases flashed through my mind. The slide would happen during the next full moon, when gravitational forces would add just enough pressure to trigger the catastrophic failure. 48 hours. "And if I help you, you can stop it?" The spirit showed me the network functioning properly, invisible waves of stabilizing energy flowing through the mountains like a vast nervous system. The dangerous fault line would be held in place. The pressure would be gradually released through tiny, harmless tremors instead of one massive collapse. But it also showed me the cost. To channel that much earth energy through my human body would change me permanently. I would become something between human and stone spirit, able to sense every geological shift for hundreds of miles, but never fully belonging to either world again. I thought about Emma teaching her second graders. reading them stories about friendly dinosaurs and helping them plant seeds in little paper cups. I thought about the 1,000 other people in the valley below who had no idea their lives were hanging by a thread. "Show me where we start," I said. The first damaged circle was 15 miles north, hidden in a grove of ancient oaks that the Cherokee had considered sacred. When we got there, and I say we because I could feel the stone spirits traveling with me now, their presence like a constant humming in my bones, I saw what human carelessness had done. Someone had built a hunting cabin right through the middle of the circle. Half the stones had been pushed aside or buried under concrete foundations. The delicate balance that had protected this area for thousands of years was completely broken. "This is going to take hours," I said, looking at the massive stones I'd have to move. But the spirits had other ideas. They flowed into the remaining stones, and I watched 4-ton granite pillars slide across the ground like they weighed nothing. In 20 minutes, the circle was restored to its original pattern. The hard part was reactivating it. The spirits showed me how to position my hands on specific stones while humming in frequencies that hurt my throat. I had to match the resonance of the underground energy channels, like tuning a massive instrument made of living rock. When I got it right, the stones began to glow with that same blue light. Power flowed through the ground beneath my feet, and I felt the first damaged connection repair itself. But the effort nearly killed me. When the light faded, I collapsed, coughing up blood. The spirit's energy was too much for my human body to handle safely. "I can't do this 2 more times," I gasped. The lead spirit touched my shoulder, and suddenly the pain was gone. But when I looked at my hands, they had a gray tint to them, like stone dust under the skin. The transformation was starting. The second circle was even worse. It had been partially destroyed by a logging operation, and the remaining stones were scattered across a clear-cut hillside. We worked through the night, me and my invisible partners, rebuilding something that should have been left alone in the first place. This time, when I channeled the energy to reactivate the circle, my skin actually turned gray for several minutes. I could feel my heartbeat slowing down, my breathing becoming deeper and more controlled. Part of me was becoming something that could survive the massive forces we were working with. By dawn, 2/3 of the network was restored. I could feel the mountains themselves responding, subtle shifts in pressure that would prevent smaller landslides and ease the stress on major fault lines. But the big one, the catastrophic slide that would destroy the valley, was still building toward critical mass. The third circle was the key to everything, and it was in the worst shape of all. Located on a peak that had been strip-mined in the 1,970 seconds, most of the original stones were gone entirely. What remained was a few broken pieces scattered around a huge crater filled with toxic runoff water. "This is impossible," I said, staring at the destruction. "There's nothing left to work with." But the stone spirits had been planning for this possibility for decades. They led me to a hidden cave system that ran under the mountain, where they had been slowly growing new stones from concentrated mineral deposits. These weren't like the ancient megaliths. They were smaller, more refined, designed specifically to channel the enormous energies we needed to stop the slide. But they were also unstable, full of raw power that could kill me if I made a mistake. I spent the day arranging the new stones according to the spirit's guidance, while they told me stories of other humans who had tried to help them over the centuries. Most had died. A few had succeeded but were changed forever, becoming hermits who lived in the deep caves and spoke only in the language of moving stone. As the sun set and the full moon rose, I began the final activation sequence. The moment I touched the first stone, I felt the full power of the mountain network flow through me. My body convulsed as electricity-like energy raced through my nervous system. My vision went white, then shifted to something beyond normal sight. I could see the bones of the mountains, the slow dance of continental plates, the tiny movements of individual molecules in the bedrock. And I could see the fault line that threatened the valley, swollen with pressure like an infected wound. The stone spirits joined their power with mine, and together we reached deep into the earth to ease that pressure. It was like performing surgery on a giant, carefully releasing tension without causing the very collapse we were trying to prevent. The process took hours. My human body was failing under the strain, but the part of me that was becoming something else grew stronger. I felt my consciousness expanding, connecting with geological processes that moved on timescales of millions of years. Finally, just as my heart was about to stop completely, we succeeded. The dangerous pressure released itself harmlessly through hundreds of tiny fissures, each no bigger than a crack in a sidewalk. The fault lines stabilized, held in place by the restored network of stone circles. The valley was safe. But when it was over, I collapsed unconscious and didn't wake up for 3 days. I woke up in the county hospital with Emma holding my hand. She looked exhausted and worried, but she smiled when she saw my eyes open. "Dad, how do you feel?" I tried to answer, but my voice came out strange, deeper and rougher than before. When I looked at my hands, they still had that gray tint under the skin, and I could feel the stone spirit's presence like a constant whisper in the back of my mind. "What happened to you up there?" Emma asked. "The rescue team found you at some old mining site, unconscious and hypothermic. You've been out for 3 days." I started to tell her the truth, but then I felt a gentle pressure in my mind. The spirits were warning me to be careful. Some things were too dangerous to share, even with family. "I was investigating some unusual seismic activity," I said finally. "Must have pushed myself too hard." The official story was that I discovered a previously unknown fault line that was close to failure. My accurate prediction of several small earthquakes over the next few weeks made me something of a hero in geological circles. The university offered me a research position, and the state government created a new early warning system based on my recommendations. Nobody questioned why all the seismic activity had suddenly stabilized, or why the dangerous fault readings had disappeared overnight. Emma stayed with me during my recovery, and I could see she was still worried about my mental state. The changes in me were subtle but real. My skin was tougher, my reflexes were slower but stronger, and I could sense underground activity from miles away. But more importantly, I could feel the network of stone circles humming with protective energy throughout the mountains. The ancient guardians were awake and active again, watching for new threats and working to keep the delicate balance that protected thousands of lives. 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital, I returned to my job as a forest ranger. But now I had a secret mission. I was the human liaison for an ancient protection system that most people would never know existed. I started visiting all the stone circles in my territory, checking on their condition and learning more about their history. The spirits taught me how to sense dangerous changes in the mountains and how to make small adjustments that could prevent disasters before they started. It wasn't an easy life. The connection to geological forces that ran so deep and slow made normal human concerns feel temporary and insignificant. Sometimes I would stand still for hours, listening to the mountain's heartbeat, and forget that I needed things like food and sleep. But when I thought about Emma's students learning to read, or my father complaining about the food at the retirement home, or all the ordinary people living ordinary lives in the valley below, I remembered why this work mattered. 6 months later, I prevented another potential landslide by secretly adjusting 3 stones in a circle near a new housing development. Last spring, I helped the spirits redirect underground water flow to prevent a major sinkhole from opening under the elementary school. Each time I use this power, I become a little less human and a little more something else. Someday, I might disappear into the caves like those other guardians from centuries past. But for now, I'm still Daniel Whitlock, forest ranger and protector of the singing stones. And as long as I can keep the balance between the old world and the new, the mountains will keep their ancient promise to shield the people who live in their shadow. Just remember, if you're ever hiking in the Virginia mountains and you hear stones humming in the distance, pay attention. They might be trying to tell you something important. And if you see an old ranger standing very still among the stone circles, don't disturb him. He's listening to something you can't hear, and the conversation he's having might be the only thing standing between you and a disaster you'll never see coming. The mountains are old and patient, but they never forget, and neither do their guardians. My name is Elizabeth Thornton, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. Before that, I taught elementary school for 8 years. I know kids, how they think, how they act, and most importantly, how they disappear. In all my time working with families in Daniel Boone National Forest, I've prevented 23 accidents. Lost hikers, bee stings, broken bones from climbing where they shouldn't. Kids wander off. It's what they do. But kids don't just vanish into thin air. That's what I kept telling myself during the October, when everything changed. The Red River Gorge in eastern Kentucky is beautiful in fall. The trees turn orange and red, and families come from all over to camp and hike. But 25 miles east of our main camping areas, there's a place most people don't know about. Old mining towns from the 1952, abandoned when the coal ran out. Empty houses with broken windows, playgrounds where the swings creak in the wind. I'd been out there a few times over the years, checking for illegal camping or making sure teenagers weren't getting into trouble. The place always felt wrong to me. Too quiet. Not the good kind of quiet you get in deep woods, but the kind that makes you want to look over your shoulder. The first family to mention it was the Hendersons from Louisville. They'd been camping at our regular sites when their two boys, ages 7 and 9, came back talking about new friends they'd met. "Where did you meet them, Mrs. Henderson asked. "At the school," little Tommy said. "They showed us their classroom." I was doing my evening rounds when Mrs. Henderson flagged me down. She seemed worried. "My boys keep talking about playing with local children," she said. "But we haven't seen any other families around here. Sometimes kids from nearby towns come through," I told her. Nothing to worry about. But I was lying. There weren't any nearby towns. Not for 25 miles. The next morning, the Henderson boys were different. Quieter. They kept asking if they could go back to school and see their friends. When I asked them to describe these friends, they got vague. "They're just kids," 9-year-old Jake said. "They know lots of games." "What kind of games?" "Old games, from before." Something cold touched my spine. I told myself it was just the October wind. That afternoon, I hiked out to the abandoned mining area. I told myself I was being silly, but 14 years of keeping families safe had taught me to trust my gut. The first thing I noticed was the playground. The swings were moving. There was no wind. I stood there for a full minute, watching those rusty chains sway back and forth like invisible children were pumping their legs. The hair on my arms stood up. I walked closer. The ground under the swings was worn smooth, like it had been used recently. Fresh footprints in the dirt, small ones, child-sized. But this place had been empty for over 30 years. I checked the school building next. The front door hung open on broken hinges. Inside, dust covered everything except for one classroom, room 3B. The desks were arranged in perfect rows. The chalkboard was clean, and written in fresh white chalk were the words, "Welcome to our school." My hands shook as I took photos. None of this made sense. There was no electricity here. No running water. No reason for children to be playing in a place that should have been forgotten. But the footprints didn't lie. Neither did the swing marks in the dirt or the fresh chalk on the board. Someone had been here. Recently. The question was, who? The next family arrived 2 days later. The Millers from Tennessee, with twin girls age 8. I made a point to check on them that evening. "How's your stay going?" I asked Mr. Miller. "Great. The girls love it here. They've made some local friends already." My stomach dropped. "Friends?" "Yeah, some kids from town. They've been playing together all afternoon." Mrs. Miller smiled. "It's nice to see them getting along with children their age. They don't get much chance back home." I kept my voice calm. "Where exactly have they been playing?" "Oh, about a mile that way." She pointed east, toward the abandoned area. "At some old school. The girls say it's like a museum." I felt sick. "Mrs. Miller, there are no other children staying in this area. And that old school, it's not safe for kids." Her smile faded. "What do you mean? The girls have been there twice now. They say their new friends know all about the history of the place." I radioed for backup and asked the Millers to take me to their daughters. We found the twins sitting in the grass near the abandoned playground, talking to empty air. "Who are you playing with?" Mrs. Miller asked. "Sarah and Tommy and Beth," one twin replied. "They go to school here." "Where are they now?" The girls looked around, confused. They were just here. They always disappear when grown-ups come. I knelt down beside them. "What do these friends look like?" "Normal kids. But their clothes are funny, old-fashioned, and they're really pale." "What do they tell you about?" "School stuff. They say they've been in 3rd grade for a really long time. They want us to stay and learn with them." Mrs. Miller grabbed my arm. "What's going on?" I didn't know how to explain. I barely understood it myself, but I knew we needed to get the girls away from here. That night, I called my supervisor and requested permission to research the area's history. What I found made my blood run cold. In March 1952, a mining disaster had forced the sudden evacuation of 3 small towns. The emergency was so urgent that families were told to leave immediately. School buses were sent to collect the children while their parents gathered belongings. But spring storms had made the mountain roads treacherous. One bus, carrying 47 children from the elementary school, had crashed during the evacuation. All the children died instantly. The towns were never rebuilt. The families never came back. The school was left exactly as it was on that final day, as a memorial to the children who died. But here's what bothered me most. The children had died on a Wednesday afternoon. In the middle of the school day, they never got to finish their lessons or say goodbye to their teachers. According to the old newspaper reports, the last thing the teacher had written on the chalkboard was, "Tomorrow we will learn about growing up." They never got that lesson. The next morning, I found fresh handprints on the school windows. Small ones, from the inside. When I entered room 3B, new words were written on the chalkboard. "We're still waiting for our lesson." I started to shake and couldn't stop. That afternoon, the Miller twins went missing. We found them 3 hours later in the abandoned classroom, sitting at 2 small desks, staring at the empty teacher's desk at the front of the room. They were pale and cold to the touch, but alive. "What were you doing?" Mrs. Miller asked, tears streaming down her face. "Waiting for class to start?" One twin whispered. "Our friend said if we waited long enough, the teacher would come back." When I looked at the chalkboard, there was new writing. "Class begins at sunset." That's when I realized the dead children weren't just haunting this place. They were recruiting. I convinced my supervisor to temporarily close the camping areas near the abandoned towns. I told him about structural dangers and unstable buildings. I didn't mention the dead children. Not yet. But word spreads fast in small communities. By the end of the week, 3 more families had come specifically to see the historic school their friends had told them about. Each family had children. Each child made friends with the hollow children, and each child came back different. The Patterson boy, age 10, started speaking in an old-fashioned way. He said, "swell," instead of cool, and asked his mother if she had any victory gardens like his new friends talked about. The Chen family's daughter began drawing pictures of children in 1,950 seconds clothing. When her parents asked about them, she said, "They're my classmates. They've been waiting so long to finish 3rd grade." But it was the Morrison family that made me realize how serious this was getting. Their son Danny was 11, older than the others. He'd always been mature for his age, his mother told me. But after spending an afternoon at the abandoned school, he started acting like a young child. He asked for his mother to pack his lunch in a metal lunchbox. He wanted to walk to school instead of taking the bus. He began talking about how much he missed his teacher, Mrs. Foster. Mrs. Foster had been the 3rd grade teacher who died with the children in 1952. That night, I returned to the school alone. I brought my camera, a flashlight, and every piece of equipment I could carry. I needed proof of what was happening. The building was ice cold inside, even though it was a warm October evening. My breath came out in white puffs. The temperature dropped more with each step I took toward room 3B. The classroom was different. The desks weren't dusty anymore. They looked like they'd been used recently. There were books on each desk, pencils laid out neatly, and papers with children's handwriting. The handwriting was fresh, but the papers were dated the 15th of March, 1952. The day the children died, I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me, small feet, like children running. When I turned around, the hallway was empty, but I could see wet footprints on the dusty floor. The footprints led to room 3B. When I looked back at the classroom, there were children sitting at the desks. I could see through them, but they were there. 47 children in 1,950 seconds clothing, sitting perfectly still, hands folded, staring at the front of the room, waiting. None of them looked at me. They just waited. The chalkboard now read, "Today's lesson, how to say goodbye." I tried to speak, but no sound came out. The children continued staring at the front of the room, waiting for a teacher who would never come. Then I heard a woman's voice, soft and gentle. "Elizabeth?" I spun around. Standing at the back of the classroom was a woman in a 1,950 seconds dress. her hair pinned up in victory rolls. She was translucent, like the children, but her eyes were kind. "You're Mrs. Foster," I whispered. She nodded. "I've been waiting for someone who could help, someone who understands children." "Help with what?" "They don't understand why they can't finish growing up. They think if they can complete their education, they can move on. But they keep recruiting living children to fill their classroom because they remember how it felt to be left behind." "How do I stop them?" Mrs. Foster's expression was sad. "They need to learn the lesson they never got. They need to understand that growing up sometimes means letting go. But they won't listen to me. I'm just another ghost to them now." Behind me, I heard whispers. The children were talking to each other in hushed voices. "Why won't the teacher start class? We've been so good. We just want to learn. We don't want to be left behind again." When I turned back to Mrs. Foster, she was fading. "Help them learn," she whispered, "before they take more children with them." Then she was gone, and I was alone with 47 dead children who just wanted to finish 3rd grade. The next morning, Danny Morrison didn't come back to his campsite. We found him in room 3B, sitting at a desk, holding a pencil, staring at a blank piece of paper. He was breathing, but barely. When we tried to move him, he fought us. "I can't leave," he said. "Class isn't over yet," Mrs. Foster said. "We have to wait." His mother was crying. "Danny, please, we need to go home." "This is home now," he said. "This is where children belong." That's when I saw the truth. The Hollow children weren't just recruiting living children to play with them. They were trying to replace themselves. I had less than 24 hours. Danny Morrison was fading fast, and his parents were talking about taking him to a hospital. But I knew doctors couldn't fix what was wrong with him. The Hollow children had their hooks in deep, and if I didn't act soon, Danny would join them permanently. I spent that evening researching everything I could about the 1952 disaster. In the town library, I found Mrs. Foster's personal effects, donated by her family after she died. Among them was her lesson plan book. The 15th of March 1952 was supposed to be the day she taught her students about growing up and moving on. The lesson was about how children become adults, how families change, and how sometimes people have to say goodbye to the places and people they love. The children never got that lesson. They died thinking they were coming back to school the next day. I also found something else, a school photo from March 1952. 47 children smiling at the camera. And in the corner, barely visible, was a woman who looked exactly like me, my grandmother. She'd been the school nurse in 1952. She'd died in the bus crash with the children, trying to keep them calm and safe during the evacuation. The Hollow children weren't random. They'd been waiting for someone from my family to come back and finish what was started. That night, I returned to the school one final time. I brought my grandmother's nursing bag, which my mother had kept all these years, and Mrs. Foster's lesson plan book. The classroom was full when I arrived. All 47 children sat at their desks, but now Danny Morrison was, among them, getting paler by the hour. His eyes were starting to look empty, like the others. Mrs. Foster appeared as soon as I entered. "You came back?" she said. "My grandmother was supposed to be here," I said. "She was supposed to help you." She tried. But the crash happened so fast. The children were scared. They didn't understand why they had to leave school in the middle of the day. I walked to the front of the classroom. 47 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. Danny's eyes were the only ones that still looked fully alive, but barely. "Good afternoon, class," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm Miss Thornton. I'm here to teach today's lesson." The children straightened up in their seats. They'd been waiting for this moment for over 30 years. I opened Mrs. Foster's lesson plan book to the 15th of March, 1952. "Today we're going to learn about growing up," I began. "Growing up means learning that sometimes we have to leave places we love. Sometimes we have to say goodbye to people who are important to us." One of the Hollow children raised her hand. Her voice was like wind through dry leaves. "But we don't want to leave school. We like it here." "I know," I said, "but staying in one place forever isn't growing up. Growing up means being brave enough to try new things, even when we're scared." Another child spoke up. "What if we forget our friends?" "You won't forget," I said. "The people we love stay in our hearts forever. But we have to let them be happy, And we have to find our own happiness too. Danny Morrison raised his hand. His voice was stronger than the others. What about our families? They'll be sad if we leave. Your families want you to be happy and free, I said. They don't want you to stay trapped in one place, even if it's because you love them. I could see some of the children beginning to fade around the edges. The lesson was working, but the hollow children fought back. The temperature in the room dropped so fast that ice began forming on the windows. The children's voices rose together. We don't want to go. We want to stay. We want to learn. You have learned, I said firmly. You've learned the most important lesson of all. You've learned how to love something so much that you're willing to let it go. Danny Morrison stood up from his desk. Color was returning to his face. I want to go home, he said. Then go, I told him. Your family is waiting. One by one, the hollow children began to stand. They were becoming more translucent, but they looked peaceful. The little girl in the front row smiled at me. Thank you for teaching us, she said. We understand now, Mrs. Foster appeared beside me. Class dismissed, she said gently. The children filed out of the classroom, fading as they walked. I could hear them talking to each other. I can't wait to see what comes next. I hope my mom isn't too worried. Thank you, teacher. Danny Morrison was the last to leave. He looked back at me before walking out. Will you tell my parents I'm okay? You can tell them yourself, I said. When the classroom was empty, Mrs. Foster turned to me one last time. Your grandmother would be proud, she said. You finished what she started. Then she faded too, and I was alone in a room that finally felt at peace. I found Danny Morrison walking down the forest path toward his campsite, confused but fully alive. His parents cried when they saw him. He remembered everything. The hollow children, the classroom, the feeling of being trapped between life and something else. They weren't bad, he told me later. They were just scared and lonely. I filed my official report the next day. I wrote about structural damages and safety hazards that made the abandoned school area unsuitable for visitors. The area was officially closed to the public, but I also wrote another report, one that went into the state archives. I documented the history of the 1952 disaster, the children who died, and the teacher who tried to save them. A small memorial was built at the site, with the names of all 47 children and Mrs. Foster. The hollow children never returned. The playground stands empty now, the swings still and quiet. The classroom in 3B is dusty again, with cobwebs in the corners and leaves blown in through broken windows. Sometimes, though, when I'm doing my rounds near that area, I think I hear something. Not crying or calling for help, but something else. Laughter. The sound of children playing somewhere far away, somewhere happy. 3 months after the incident, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a class photo from 1952, the same one I'd seen in the library. But this time, all 47 children were smiling, and they looked older somehow. More grown up. On the back, in a child's handwriting, was written, "Thank you for helping us graduate." I keep that photo on my desk at the ranger station. It reminds me that sometimes the most important part of my job isn't preventing accidents or enforcing rules. Sometimes it's helping people find their way home, even when home isn't where they started. If you ever go camping in Daniel Boone National Forest, you might hear stories about the hollow children. Local folks still talk about them sometimes, especially around Halloween. But the stories have changed. Now they say the children aren't hollow anymore. They say on quiet nights, you can hear them playing in some distant, peaceful place. A place where childhood never really ends, but where children can choose to grow up when they're ready. I hope that's true. I really do. Because sometimes, the best ghost story is the one where everybody gets to go home. My name is Joseph McBride, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years. In that time, I've seen plenty of things that would make most folks nervous: wild animals, dangerous weather, and criminals who think the mountains are a good place to hide. But I always had an answer for everything. Bears follow food, storms follow patterns, criminals follow money. I specialized in shutting down illegal operations in the Great Smoky Mountains. Moonshine stills, mostly. Mountain families had been making illegal whiskey in these hills for over 200 years, and they didn't plan to stop just because the government said so. I'd shut down 47 operations in my career. Won federal awards for it. I knew every trick they used. The mountains were my territory, specifically Cataloochee Valley, 20 miles from park headquarters. Remote doesn't begin to describe it. Radio contact was spotty on good days, impossible when storms rolled through. Which happened a lot that August of 1977. The heat was crushing, the kind that pressed down on you like a heavy blanket and made everything smell like rotting leaves and sweat. I'd heard all the stories, of course. Mountain devils, spirits that protected moonshine families, demons that would steal your soul if you messed with their stills. Local kids loved to scare each other with tales of blue flames that danced in the woods and figures made of fire that stalked federal agents. Mountain devils were just stories moonshiners told to keep revenuers away. I always said, psychological warfare. Smart, really. Why fight the law when you could make them afraid to come looking? That morning started like any other. I was checking an old homestead site when I found fresh tire tracks. Someone had been hauling heavy equipment up an overgrown trail that supposedly led nowhere. My metal detector picked up buried copper about 50 yards into the woods. A still, definitely. But when I followed the trail deeper, I found something that made me stop and stare. The trees were wrong. Not damaged, not diseased wrong. Every leaf hung perfectly still despite the breeze. The air smelled like sulfur, mixed with corn mash, sweet and rotten at the same time. And it was hot. Not normal, August hot, but furnace hot. Like standing too close to a fire. I pulled out my radio but got nothing but static. My camera worked fine though. I took pictures of everything, the tire tracks, the strange trees, the areas where my metal detector went crazy. Standard procedure. Document everything, investigate carefully, call for backup when needed. But as I worked my way toward where the still had to be hidden, I kept getting the feeling that something was watching me. The woods had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind, just that pressing heat and the smell of sulfur that got stronger with every step. I'd investigated dozens of moonshine operations. I knew what to expect: hidden equipment, booby traps, maybe an angry mountain family with shotguns. I was prepared for criminals. I wasn't prepared for what I found in that hidden valley. The still sat in a clearing that shouldn't have existed. The trees formed a perfect circle around it, their trunks black and twisted like they'd been burned from the inside. But the strange thing wasn't the setting, it was the still itself. It was running, producing clear, high-proof alcohol that dripped steadily into mason jars. But there was no fire underneath it, no heat source at all. The copper tubing was ice cold to the touch, yet somehow the mash was boiling. Steam rose from the top, carrying that sulfur and corn smell that made my eyes water. I'd never seen anything like it. In 11 years of shutting down illegal operations, I'd learned that making moonshine requires heat. Lots of it. This still was producing perfect white lightning without any visible fuel source. I started taking pictures, documenting everything. The equipment looked old, really old. Hand-forged copper, wooden barrels bound with metal hoops that had turned green with age, but it was in perfect condition, like it had been made yesterday. That's when I noticed the animals. 3 raccoons lay scattered around the clearing, all dead. Their mouths were open, tongues hanging out, and they smelled like whiskey. I knelt down next to one and saw that its eyes were clouded white, alcohol poisoning. But raccoons are smart about what they eat. They wouldn't drink pure moonshine. My radio crackled to life suddenly, making me jump. "McBride, come in. McBride, do you copy?" I grabbed it quickly. "This is McBride. I'm investigating a still operation in Sector 7. Something strange is going on here." Static answered me. Then a voice that wasn't from headquarters. "Get out." The voice was low and rough, like someone who'd been smoking for 50 years. It didn't sound like it was coming through the radio. It sounded like it was coming from the trees around me. "Who is this?" I said into the radio. "Identify yourself." More static. Then, "This place is protected. Leave now." My hands were shaking as I put the radio away. In 11 years, I'd never had anyone threaten me over the radio. Most moonshiners just ran when they saw a ranger coming. They didn't stick around to chat. I decided to collect evidence and get out. I took samples of the alcohol clear as water, strong enough to strip paint. I photographed the dead animals, the impossible still, the burned trees. My metal detector was going crazy, beeping and clicking like it couldn't decide what it was finding. As I worked, the heat kept getting worse. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and I was starting to feel dizzy. The sulfur smell was so strong now that I could taste it on my tongue, like licking a burnt match. That's when I saw the footprints. They led from the still to the tree-lined bare human feet, but wrong somehow, too long, with what looked like claw marks at the toes. And they were burned into the ground, like someone with red-hot feet had walked across the dirt. I followed them to the edge of the clearing, where they disappeared into the normal forest. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as soon as I stepped out of the circle of twisted trees. My radio immediately started working again. "McBride, this is headquarters. We've been trying to reach you for an hour. Report your status." I looked back at the clearing. The still was still running, still producing alcohol from nothing. The dead animals were still there, but somehow, in the normal forest, it all seemed impossible. "This is McBride," I said into the radio. "I need backup. I've found something that doesn't make sense." The backup never came. That night, a storm knocked out communications for the entire sector. By morning, when I led a team back to the clearing, everything was gone. No still, no dead animals, no burned trees. Just normal forest, like nothing had ever been there. But I had the photos, and the alcohol samples, and questions that kept me awake at night. The lab report came back 3 days later. The moonshine was 180 proof, almost pure alcohol, but it contained compounds that shouldn't exist, elements that weren't on the periodic table. The chemist who tested it called me personally. "Mr. McBride, where did you get this sample? It's impossible. This alcohol has properties that don't follow the laws of chemistry." I started researching old park records, county histories, newspaper archives from the 1800s. What I found made my blood run cold. Every 20 years or so, for the past 2 centuries, a federal agent or revenue officer had died investigating moonshine operations in that exact area. They all died the same way, burned alive, but in circumstances that made no sense. Rainstorms, creek beds. One poor guy burned to death while standing in a lake. The pattern went back to 1847, when a man named Silas McBride, my great-great-grandfather, died investigating reports of a supernatural moonshine operation. The newspaper called it death by mysterious fire and noted that his body was found with alcohol in his bloodstream, though witnesses swore he never drank. I kept going back to that clearing. Every time, I found it normal and empty. But my metal detector still picked up something buried there. Something big and copper that should have been a still. And sometimes, if the wind was right, I could smell sulfur and corn mash. Then, Agent Morrison went missing. Morrison was ATF, sent to help with my investigation. He was a good man, experienced, careful. But when he didn't check in after going to investigate the clearing, I knew something was wrong. I found him the next morning, or what was left of him. He was sitting against a tree at the edge of the clearing, looking perfectly normal, except that he was dead. No wounds, no signs of struggle. But when I got closer, I saw that his eyes were clouded white, and he smelled like moonshine. The official report said heart attack, but I knew better. Morrison didn't drink, and he was in perfect health. Someone or something had killed him the same way those raccoons died. That night, I went back to the clearing alone. I had to know what was happening. I brought holy water from the church where I grew up, a camera with fresh film, and a tape recorder to document everything. The still was back. Not just back bigger, more complex. Copper tubing, snaked through the trees like metal vines, connecting barrels and condensers in a pattern that hurt to look at. And it was all running without any heat source, producing gallons of impossible moonshine. But this time, I wasn't alone. A tall figure stood next to the still, tending it like a gardener tending flowers. At first, I thought it was just a man, maybe the moonshiner whose operation I'd been investigating. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a man at all. It was made of blue fire, not burning, but actually composed of flames that danced and flickered in the shape of a human body. It had no face, just a suggestion of features in the dancing light, and when it turned to look at me, I felt heat that should have killed me instantly. "You came back?" it said, and its voice was the same one I'd heard on the radio. "I warned you to leave." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The entity stepped toward me, and everywhere its feet touched, the ground burned. "Your family has been a problem for a long time," it said. "Silas McBride, Joseph McBride. The names change, but the interference remains constant." "What are you?" I managed to say. "I am what your people made me. A contract signed in blood and sealed with souls. This operation has been running for 200 years, and it will continue long after you're gone." The heat was getting stronger. My camera melted in my hands. The tape recorder warped and died, but somehow the holy water in my pocket stayed cool. "The families pay their price," the entity continued. "A soul for every generation, protection for their trade. The government sends agents, the agents die, the trade continues. It's been a good arrangement." "What about Morrison?" I asked. "Agent Morrison was merely the latest payment. Your great-great-grandfather was the first. You, Joseph McBride, will be the last." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about moonshine. It was about my family. We'd been coming here for generations, drawn by duty and law enforcement, only to die feeding this thing's hunger. The entity raised its hand, and blue flames danced between its fingers. "Any last words, McBride?" I pulled out the holy water and threw it directly at the creature's face. The holy water hit the entity like acid. It screamed a sound like steam escaping from a boiler and staggered backward. Where the water touched, its blue fire sputtered and went out, revealing something horrible underneath. It wasn't just made of fire, it was a man, or had been once, burned and twisted, held together by supernatural flame and pure hatred. For just a moment, I saw its real face, blackened skin, empty eye sockets, a mouth full of broken teeth. "You think blessed water will save you?" it roared. "I have been bound to this place for 2 centuries. Your God has no power here." But the water had heard it. I could see that much. And it had given me time to think. I ran. Not away from the clearing, but deeper into it, toward the still itself. If this thing was bound to moonshine production, then the still had to be important. Maybe even necessary. The entity followed, its footsteps burning holes in the ground. "You cannot destroy what has been protected by blood. The contract cannot be broken." The still was huge up close, bigger than it had looked from a distance. Copper pipes twisted through the trees like veins, all leading back to a central chamber that had to be the original still. It was older than the rest, green with age, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. "The Hadley family signed the contract in 1847, the entity said, stalking toward me. "Protection for their moonshine operation in exchange for the souls of any who interfered. Your ancestor was the first payment. You will be the last because after tonight, no McBride will remain to threaten this place." I touched the original still. It was hot, not fire hot, but fever hot, like touching someone's forehead during sickness. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to move in the firelight. "What did you promise them?" I asked, trying to buy time while I figured out how to destroy something made of supernatural copper. Perfect alcohol, protection from the law, prosperity for their family line, simple wants for simple people. The entity was close now, close enough that my clothes were starting to smoke. They paid gladly, 1 soul per generation to keep their business safe. And you've been collecting souls ever since. Federal agents, revenue officers, park rangers, anyone who threatens the operation. The law keeps sending them, and I keep collecting them. It's been quite profitable. I thought about Morrison, about my great-great-grandfather, about all the men who died in this place over the centuries. They'd come here doing their jobs, trying to uphold the law, and they'd been murdered by this thing to protect criminals. That's when I got angry. Really angry. I grabbed the original still with both hands, ignoring the pain as the hot metal burned my palms. "Your contract is with the Hadley family, but where are they now?" The entity paused. "They moved on, died out, but the contract remains." "A contract with a family that no longer exists? That's not a contract, that's just murder." I pulled at the still, trying to topple it. The copper was old and had been weakened by centuries of use. If I could destroy the original equipment, maybe I could break whatever supernatural binding held this thing here. "Stop," the entity screamed. "You don't understand. Without the contract, without the protection, I'll be free to hunt anyone. The binding will be broken." But I didn't stop. I thought about Morrison's clouded eyes, about my great-great-grandfather dying in a place he'd never seen before. about all the good men who died to protect a criminal operation that didn't even exist anymore. The still came apart in my hands. 200 years of mountain weather had made the connections weak, and supernatural heat had made the metal brittle. Copper tubing snapped, barrels split open, and impossible moonshine poured out onto the ground. The entity rushed at me, blue flames roaring like a furnace. I threw the last of my holy water at it and dove away as fire exploded where I'd been standing. When the light faded, the clearing was burning. Real fire this time, spreading through the twisted trees and consuming everything the supernatural flames had touched. And in the center of it all, the entity was changing. Its blue fire was going out, piece by piece, revealing the burned corpse underneath. But as the supernatural flames died, the hatred in its empty eye sockets was growing stronger. "Free," it whispered. "Finally free." And I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. The thing that had been bound to protect moonshine operations was now loose in the world. The contract was broken, the still destroyed, but the entity remained. And it was angry. I ran through burning woods, while something that should have been dead for 2 centuries chased me. My truck was parked a mile away, and I didn't think I'd make it. The entity might be free from its supernatural contract, but it was still made of hate and fire. But as I ran, something unexpected happened. The creature started falling apart. Not just the fire, the whole thing. Pieces of burned flesh crumbled away. Supernatural flames guttered out like candles in the wind. Its screams grew weaker and more distant. When I finally stopped and looked back, there was nothing following me. Just normal forest fire, spreading through dry undergrowth the way fires do. No blue flames, no impossible heat, no entity made of hatred and copper moonshine. It took 3 days for the fire department to put out the blaze. They found the remains of what they called historical moonshine equipment, and the burned bones of what they assumed was someone who'd been caught in the fire. The official report listed it as an accidental death caused by illegal alcohol production. I never told them about the entity. Who would believe me? But I kept the pictures I'd taken before my camera melted, and I wrote down everything I remembered, just in case. The Cataloochee Valley was declared a fire hazard zone and closed to public access. No more moonshine operations were ever found in that area. The pattern of mysterious deaths that had lasted for 2 centuries was finally broken. I transferred to a different district a month later. Officially, it was for a promotion. Unofficially, I couldn't stand to be in those mountains anymore. Every time the wind was right, I swore I could smell sulfur and corn mash. But the experience changed me. I started noticing things other rangers missed. Patterns that didn't make sense. Animals behaving wrong. Places that felt watched. I learned to trust my instincts about the supernatural, and I always carry blessed water now. Because here's what I learned in that burning clearing. Some criminal operations are protected by more than just family loyalty and mountain isolation. Some have contracts that go deeper than law and order, and some debts get paid in souls. If you're ever hiking in the mountains and you smell sulfur mixed with corn mash, turn around and leave immediately. If you see blue flames that give no heat, don't investigate. And if someone offers you moonshine from an unmarked jar, remember that some recipes require more than corn and water. The devil's always looking for new customers, and mountain spirits have long memories. Some traditions die hard, but some never die at all. They just wait for the next fool who thinks laws and badges are stronger than blood and fire. My name is Margaret Holloway, and I've been a park ranger for 9 years. I know every sound these mountains make at night. The screech of an owl hunting mice, the crack of tree branches in the wind, the rustle of deer moving through tall grass. After 9 years, you learn to tell the difference between normal forest sounds and something else. I work alone most nights in the George Washington National Forest, way up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It's beautiful country, but it can be lonely. The nearest town is 12 miles down a winding mountain road. When storms hit, the radio goes dead, and I'm completely cut off from the world. People always ask why I became a ranger. The truth is, I love the quiet. I have a PhD in animal behavior, and I came here to study how animals act at night. Most people think the forest is scary after dark, but I find it peaceful. At least, I used to. I'm the first woman ranger they've had in this district. Some of the old-timers weren't happy about it at first, but I proved myself. I know these mountains better than anyone. I can track a bear by its footprints and tell you what kind of mood it was in. I can identify bird calls from a mile away. I've published papers on mountain wildlife that scientists still quote today. That's why nobody believed me when I started talking about the crying. It began in March, during the worst late winter storm we'd had in years. The wind was howling so hard it shook my cabin. I was getting ready for my night patrol when a family came stumbling up to my door. They were soaking wet and shaking, not just from the cold. "There's something wrong in these woods," the father said. His name was Jim Miller, and he'd brought his wife and 2 kids camping for spring break. We heard someone crying. A woman, crying like her heart was broken, but there was nobody there. His wife, Sarah, was holding their little girl tight. "It went on for hours," she whispered. "The most awful sound I've ever heard, like someone had lost everything in the world." I made them coffee and got them warmed up. "These mountains play tricks with sound," I explained. "Wind through the rocks can sound like voices. Probably just an owl call getting bounced around by the cliffs." But Jim shook his head. "This wasn't wind, this was a woman crying. We could hear words sometimes, like she was calling for help." I'd heard stories like this before. People come up to the mountains expecting peace and quiet, then every little sound scares them. Their imagination fills in the blanks. Still, something about the way they described it bothered me. They weren't the type to make things up. "Where exactly did you hear this?" I asked. "Up near Massanutten Peak," Jim said. "There's an old stone wall up there, looks like it might be from the Civil War." That got my attention. Massanutten Peak was where some of the worst fighting happened during the war. Hundreds of soldiers died up there. Local people had been telling ghost stories about that place for over 100 years. But I'm a scientist. I don't believe in ghosts. "I'll check it out tomorrow," I promised them. Probably just finding where an animal got hurt. Sometimes injured animals can sound almost human. The Millers packed up and left first thing in the morning. I never saw them again, but I heard later that Jim's mother died in a car accident 3 days after they got home. Heart attack behind the wheel. Maybe that was just a coincidence. At the time, I thought it was. The next night, I hiked up to Massanutten Peak with my gear. I brought my Nagra tape recorder, the best equipment the Park Service had. If there was something making noise up there, I'd record it and figure out what it was. The climb took 2 hours in the dark. I know these trails like the back of my hand, but something felt different that night. The air was too still. Usually, you hear insects buzzing, small animals moving around, owls calling to each other. But as I got closer to the peak, everything went quiet. Not just quiet, dead silent. Like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I found the old stone wall Jim had mentioned. It was part of a Confederate field hospital that got overrun during the Battle of Massanutten in 1864. Dozens of wounded soldiers died there before help could arrive. I'd read about it in the local history books. I set up my equipment and waited. For an hour, nothing happened. Just that strange, heavy silence. I was starting to think the Millers had imagined the whole thing when I heard it. A woman crying. It started soft and far away, like it was coming from the other side of the mountain. But sound doesn't work that way up there. The wind should have carried it off, not brought it closer. Instead, it got louder and clearer until it felt like she was standing right next to me. I grabbed my tape recorder and hit record. My hands were shaking, but I told myself it was just from the cold. The crying wasn't random. It had a rhythm to it, almost like a song. A sad, broken song that made my chest feel tight. I could hear words sometimes, but I couldn't make them out. It sounded old-fashioned, like the way people talked in movies about the Civil War. Then it stopped. Just cut off in the middle of a sob, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was even worse than the crying. My ears were ringing. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees while I was listening. When I checked my recorder, the needle wasn't moving at all, even though I could hear my own breathing. I tried everything I could think of, checked the batteries, tested the microphone, even recorded myself talking. Everything worked fine. But when I played back that time period when the crying happened, there was nothing. Just empty tape. That should have been impossible. Sound is sound. If I could hear it, the recorder should have picked, "Get up." I hiked back down the mountain that night, more confused than scared. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the crying was coming from much farther away than I thought, and some weird acoustic effect was making it seem close. Maybe my equipment had malfunctioned in the cold. But deep down, I knew something was wrong with that mountain. The next few nights, I tried different spots around Massanutten Peak. I heard the crying 3 more times, always around 3 a.m., always impossible to record. I started checking local records, looking for missing hikers or campers who might be lost and calling for help. That's when I found the pattern. Every time someone reported hearing the crying woman, something bad happened to them within a week. Car accidents, heart attacks, falls, sudden illnesses. Not always death, but always something serious. The Miller family wasn't the first. Going back through old ranger reports, I found dozens of similar stories over the years. Campers would hear crying in the night, report it to rangers, then go home and have the worst week of their lives. I started keeping a list. The more I researched, the more I found. The crying had been heard on Massanutten Peak for over a century, always by people who were about to lose someone they loved. That's when I stopped thinking about injured animals and started wondering if the old ghost stories might be true. I should have left it alone, filed a report about unexplained acoustic phenomena, and moved on to other duties. But I couldn't stop thinking about that crying. It haunted me during the day and kept me awake at night. I started reading everything I could find about the history of Massanutten Peak. The more I learned, the more disturbed I became. The peak wasn't just a battlefield. It was a place where people had been dying for hundreds of years. Native American tribes avoided it long before white settlers arrived. During the Civil War, it wasn't just soldiers who died there. Nurses, doctors, civilians caught in the fighting. Hundreds of people took their last breath on that mountain. One name kept coming up in the old records: Martha Caldwell. Martha was a nurse from town who volunteered to help at the field hospital. She was young, maybe 25, and had some kind of gift for knowing when someone was about to die. The wounded soldiers called her the Angel of Massanutten because she always knew which ones wouldn't make it through the night. She died during the final battle in 1864, shot while trying to carry wounded men to safety. According to the reports, she was still trying to save people even as she was bleeding to death. The more I read about Martha, the more I realized she sounded exactly like the woman I'd been hearing cry. I decided to go back up the mountain, but this time I brought more than just recording equipment. I packed cameras, temperature sensors, even a compass to see if there were any magnetic disturbances. If something supernatural was happening up there, I was going to document it properly. The climb felt different that night. Harder, like the mountain itself was trying to keep me away. The air was thick and cold, and every shadow looked like it was moving. When I reached the stone wall, my compass started spinning wildly. I set up my equipment and waited. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the crying started again. This time, it was closer. Much closer. I could hear every sob, every gasping breath. It sounded like a woman who had been crying for 100 years and couldn't stop. But the strangest thing was how it made me feel. The sadness wasn't just in the air around me, it was inside me, filling up my chest until I could barely breathe. Tears started running down my face, and I didn't even know why. That's when I saw her. At first, it was just a shape in the fog, a pale outline near the far end of the stone wall. But as I watched, she became clearer, a young woman in a long dress, the kind nurses wore during the Civil War. Her hair was pulled back, and her hands were covered in what looked like blood. She was looking right at me. I tried to take a picture, but my camera wouldn't work. The flash kept firing randomly, lighting up nothing but empty fog. When I looked back at where she'd been standing, she was gone. But the crying continued. And now I could understand some of the words. So many lost, she was saying. So many I couldn't save. Why won't they listen? Why won't they believe? I wanted to run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get off that mountain and never come back. But something made me stay. Maybe it was my scientific training, or maybe it was the way she'd looked at me. Not angry or threatening, but desperate, like she needed help. "Who are you?" I called out. The crying stopped immediately. The silence stretched on so long I thought she was gone. Then, very quietly, I heard her voice again. "Martha," she whispered. "I'm Martha. And you're in danger." Before I could ask what she meant, The fog rolled in so thick I couldn't see my own hands. The temperature dropped so fast my breath came out in white puffs. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could and stumbled back down the mountain, using my flashlight to find the trail. I didn't feel safe until I was back in my cabin with the door locked. The next morning, I got a call that changed everything. There had been an accident on Highway 211, the road that winds around the base of Massanutten. A school bus full of kids on a field trip had skidded on black ice and almost gone over the guardrail. The driver managed to stop just in time, but if he'd been going even 5 miles faster, 30 kids would have died. The accident happened at exactly 3:17 a.m. That's when I realized Martha wasn't just crying about the past. She was trying to warn people about the future. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Martha's face. I kept thinking about all the people who'd heard her crying over the years, all the tragedies that followed. What if she'd been trying to warn them too? What if people had died because no one listened? I started researching Martha Caldwell more seriously. I drove to the county courthouse and dug through old records. I talked to local historians and genealogists. What I found made my blood run cold. Martha hadn't just been a nurse. According to her family's letters, she'd always been able to sense when something bad was going to happen. Her grandmother had the same gift, and her great-grandmother before that. The women in Martha's family were known for their second sight. When Martha volunteered at the field hospital, she didn't just know which soldiers were dying. She knew about disasters before they happened. She warned the doctors about artillery strikes minutes before they hit. She told people to take cover moments before Confederate raiders attacked the camp. But nobody listened to her about the big one. 3 days before the final battle, Martha tried to evacuate the entire hospital. She said she'd seen a vision of hundreds of men dying in a surprise attack. The commanding officer dismissed her as a hysterical woman and ordered her to keep quiet. 237 people died in that attack, including Martha herself. According to the letters I found, Martha's dying words were, "I'll keep trying to warn them. Even if they won't listen, I'll keep trying." And she had been. For over a century, Martha had been appearing to people who were about to experience tragedy, crying out warnings that nobody understood. The problem was, her warnings came in the form of overwhelming grief and sadness. People heard her crying and felt her pain, but they didn't know what it meant. I was different. Maybe because I'd spent so much time studying animal behavior, or maybe because I had some of Martha's gift myself. Whatever the reason, I could understand what she was trying to tell me, and she was trying to tell me something big was coming. I went back up the mountain that night, but this time I wasn't afraid. I brought a notebook and pen instead of recording equipment. If Martha wanted to communicate, I was ready to listen. She appeared as soon as I reached the stone wall, clearer than ever before. In the moonlight, I could see details I'd missed before. The blood on her hands wasn't fresh. It was old, stained into her skin like it had been there for 100 years. Her dress was torn and dirty, like she'd been working in field hospitals all this time. "You came back," she said, and her voice was soft and sad. "No one ever comes back." "I want to help," I told her. "I want to understand what you're trying to warn people about." Martha's face crumpled, and fresh tears started flowing down her cheeks. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "the children. The bus will come around the curve too fast, and the driver won't see the ice until it's too late. 37 children will die unless someone stops it." "What bus? Which curve?" "Highway 211, mile marker 15, 8:30 in the morning. The Springfield Elementary field trip to the Battlefield Museum." Martha's voice was getting fainter. Like talking about it was using up all her energy. "I've been trying to warn people all week, but they just hear crying. They don't understand." "I understand," I said. "I'll stop it." Martha looked at me with such gratitude that it broke my heart. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you for listening." "Martha, why are you still here? Why haven't you moved on?" She smiled sadly. "I can't rest while people are still dying. Every time I try to go, I see another tragedy coming. Someone has to warn them. Someone has to try to save them. But you've been doing this for over 100 years. How much longer? Until someone else? I can see what I see. Until someone else can warn them." Martha was fading now, becoming transparent. "Maybe that someone is you." Before I could ask what she meant, she was gone, but her words echoed in my head all the way down the mountain. The next morning, I called in sick and drove to mile marker 15 on Highway 211. It was a sharp curve with a steep drop-off on one side and a rock face on the other. If a bus went off the road there, it would roll down the mountain for hundreds of feet. I parked my truck across both lanes and waited. At 8:28 a.m., I heard the bus coming. The driver was going too fast, just like Martha had said. When he came around the curve and saw my truck, he hit the brakes hard. The bus skidded on a patch of black ice I hadn't even noticed, sliding sideways toward the guardrail. For a horrible moment, I thought I was too late. The bus kept sliding, and I could hear children screaming inside. But it stopped just inches from the edge, the back wheels hanging over empty air. The driver was furious until he got out and saw how close they'd come to going over. When the police arrived, they found the guardrail was rusted through and wouldn't have stopped anything. If the bus had hit it at full speed, it would have snapped like a twig. 37 children went home to their families that day, instead of dying on Highway 211. I got in trouble for blocking a public road without authorization, but I didn't care. For the first time in over a century, someone had listened to Martha's warning in time to prevent a tragedy. That night, I went back up to Massanutten Peak. Martha was waiting for me at the stone wall, and for the first time since I'd met her, she wasn't crying. "Thank you," she said. "You saved them." "We saved them," I corrected. "You saw it coming. I just helped make people listen." Martha nodded. "The gift is growing stronger in you. Soon you'll be able to see the tragedies yourself, without needing me to show you." "Is that what you want? For me to take over?" "Not take over," Martha said gently. "Join me. There are so many people who need warnings, so many tragedies that could be prevented. I can't do it alone anymore." I looked at this woman who had been trying to save lives for over a century, who had given up her eternal rest to keep protecting people. I thought about all the warnings she'd tried to give that no one understood, all the lives that could have been saved if someone had just listened. "Okay," I said. "I'll help." Martha smiled, and for just a moment, she looked like the young nurse she'd been in life instead of the tormented spirit she'd become. "Thank you, Margaret. Welcome to the Watch." That was 3 months ago. Since then, my life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. Martha was right about my gift growing stronger. I started having dreams about accidents before they happened, feelings of dread that led me to specific places at specific times. I learned to trust these instincts, even when they didn't make logical sense. I've prevented 4 more tragedies so far. A landslide that would have buried a family's camping site, a heart attack that would have killed a hiker miles from help, a flash flood that would have swept away a group of teenagers swimming in the river, a tree that would have fallen on a ranger station during a storm. Each time, I found a way to intervene without revealing the supernatural source of my knowledge. I'm getting good at coming up with scientific explanations for my hunches about dangerous weather patterns and unstable geological conditions. Martha still appears to me, but less often now. She's teaching me to see the warnings myself instead of relying on her to show them to me. It's exhausting work. Every tragedy prevented takes something out of you, and knowing about future disasters you can't stop is almost unbearable. But we save who we can. That has to be enough. The other rangers have started calling me Lucky Margaret because I always seem to be in the right place at the right time. If they only knew the truth, that I'm guided by a Civil War nurse who died trying to save lives and never stopped trying. I've done some research into other battlefields and historical sites. The pattern is there if you know how to look for it. Places where many people died in trauma and grief, especially places where someone tried to save lives and failed, often have their own guardians. Spirits who refuse to move on because their work wasn't finished. I think there are more people like me out there, people who can sense these warnings and act on them. Maybe they don't know what they're experiencing. Maybe they dismiss their hunches as coincidence or imagination. But they're part of a network they don't even know exists, connected to guardians who have been watching over humanity for generations. Sometimes, late at night in my cabin, I wonder what will happen to me when I die. Will I join Martha on her eternal watch? Will someone else come along who can see what we see and help carry the burden? I don't know. But I know I'll keep doing this work as long as I can. Every life saved is worth it. Every family that goes home safe instead of grieving is worth the sleepless nights and the weight of knowledge I carry. If you're ever in the mountains and you hear a woman crying when no one's around, don't dismiss it. Listen to what your instincts are telling you. Pay attention to warnings that don't make logical sense. Sometimes the dead care more about the living than we care about ourselves. The mountains remember every tragedy, and sometimes they try to prevent the next one. Martha and I are just the messengers. Trust us. We're trying to save your life. My name is Michael Ravencroft, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. People always ask about the name. Yeah, it sounds made up, but it's real. My Cherokee grandmother used to say it meant I was meant to watch over the old places. I never believed in that stuff until what happened last November in the Pisgah National Forest. I work the Grandfather Mountain area, way up in the Blue Ridge. It's beautiful country, but lonely. On a clear day, you can see forever. On a foggy day, you can't see your own feet. That time of year, with winter coming, the mountains feel different, older, like they're holding their breath. I was driving the back roads, checking campsites before the first snow, when my radio crackled. "Mike, you there? Got something weird up at Cherokee Ridge." That was Jim Torres, head of the archaeological team, working near the old ceremonial grounds. They'd been there for 3 weeks, documenting Cherokee sites before we opened them for limited hiking tours. Good people, careful with the artifacts. "What's weird?" I asked, pulling over. "The pottery we tagged yesterday. It's showing different dates." I frowned. "Different how?" "Carbon dating says it's from 3 different time periods. Same pot. That's impossible." I've seen a lot of impossible things in these mountains. Compasses that spin in circles. Hikers who swear they walked uphill both ways. Weather that changes in seconds. But I'm practical. There's always an explanation. "Maybe the samples got mixed up," I said. "Mike, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know how to collect samples." The worry in his voice made me pause. Jim wasn't the type to call over nothing. "I'll be right there." The drive up Cherokee Ridge takes about an hour on the winding dirt road. It's one of the most remote spots in the forest, 18 miles from the nearest paved road. The Cherokee used it for ceremonies because it's so isolated. Even now, with our radio towers and GPS, you can lose contact up there. As I climbed higher, the air got colder. November in the mountains means winter's coming fast. The trees were mostly bare, and you could see the old stone formations the Cherokee considered sacred. Big granite outcrops that looked almost like buildings from a distance. I'd studied Cherokee history as part of my job. This area was important to them before the removal in 1838. They called it the place where the spirits kept watch. According to the old stories, shapeshifters lived here, beings that could take any form and remembered everything that happened in these mountains. I never put much stock in the shapeshifter stories. They seemed like metaphors to me, ways of teaching about change and adaptation. The Cherokee were practical people. They wouldn't have survived centuries in these mountains if they weren't. But driving up that mountain, with the shadows getting longer and the wind picking up, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Like I was being watched. Not by animals or people, but by something else. Something that had been there a very long time. The archaeological site was just below the main ridge, in a clearing surrounded by ancient oaks. When I got there, Jim's team was standing around looking confused. They had their equipment spread out: carbon dating tools, ground-penetrating radar, careful documentation cameras. "Show me," I said. Jim led me to a table where pottery shards were laid out on white cloth. They looked normal enough: red clay with traditional Cherokee patterns. But the paperwork next to them didn't make sense. "This piece here," Jim said, pointing to a large shard with a spiral design. "When we tested it yesterday, it came back 300 years old. This morning, same piece, same lab, it's showing 500 years. This afternoon, 150 years. I picked up the shard. It felt warm, which was strange. The temperature was dropping, and everything else felt cold. "Equipment malfunction," I suggested. "We thought so too. But look at this." He led me to where they'd been digging. The site was maybe 20 feet across, carefully marked with string and stakes. But something was wrong with the layout. When we left yesterday, we had excavated down 2 feet in a perfect grid. This morning, some areas are deeper. Some are filled in. like someone worked here overnight. I knelt down and looked at the soil. It was definitely disturbed, but not by shovels or tools. It looked more like the earth had moved itself. Any animals been digging? That's what we thought, but look at this. Sarah Chen, the team's photographer, showed me her camera. On the screen was a picture of the site from yesterday evening. Clear grid, even depth, professional excavation. Now look at what I took this morning. The second photo showed the same site, but it was different. Not just the depths Jim had mentioned, but the whole layout seemed older, like it had been there longer. Are you sure this is the same site? Same GPS coordinates? Same landmarks? Same everything? I stood up, brushing dirt off my knees. The wind was getting stronger, and it carried sounds that didn't quite make sense. Almost like voices, but too far away to understand. Pack it up for today, I told them. Weather's turning. As they loaded their equipment, I walked to the edge of the clearing. From there, you could see across the valley to the next ridge. The Cherokee used to light signal fires between the peaks to communicate across long distances. That's when I saw it. Just for a second, on the far ridge, there was smoke. A thin column rising straight up, the way it does when there's no wind. But there was wind, I could feel it. And there shouldn't have been anyone over there with a fire. I blinked, and the smoke was gone. Jim, I called, you see any campfires today? He looked where I was pointing. No, and there shouldn't be any. That area's closed to camping. I made a note to check it out tomorrow. Probably just someone lost, trying to stay warm. But something about it bothered me. The smoke had been too straight, too perfect. And it had disappeared too fast. As we drove back down the mountain in convoy, my radio picked up something strange. Static mostly, but underneath it, something that sounded almost like singing. Not words I recognized, but the rhythm was familiar. Like the Cherokee chants my grandmother used to hum when she thought no one was listening. I turned up the volume, but the signal faded. Behind us, the mountain settled into darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, I was starting to think something very old was waking up. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smoke on the ridge. Perfectly straight, perfectly still, in wind that should have scattered it. I'd been working these mountains for 17 years, and I knew the difference between normal and wrong. At 5 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and drove back up to Cherokee Ridge. I wanted to check the site before the archaeology team arrived, maybe figure out what had disturbed their excavation. The drive up was different in the early morning, quieter. The usual bird sounds were missing, and even my truck seemed to run softer, like it didn't want to wake something up. When I got to the site, I sat in my truck for a minute, just looking. Everything seemed normal in the gray dawn light. The excavation grid was exactly as we'd left it the day before. The equipment tables were undisturbed. Nothing out of place. But something felt wrong. I got out and walked to the dig site. The soil looked the same as yesterday, but when I knelt down and touched it, it was warm. Not just not frozen warm, but actually warm, like something underneath was giving off heat. I'd brought a soil thermometer, thinking maybe there was a geological explanation. Underground hot, springs, maybe, or some kind of mineral deposit. But when I pushed the probe into the ground, it read 72 degrees. The air temperature was 38. That's when I heard the singing. Faint at first, like it was coming from very far away, but definitely singing. Cherokee words, in the old dialect my grandmother had taught me. A song about honoring the spirits of the place. I stood up and turned in a slow circle, trying to locate the source. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like it was rising from the ground itself. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" The singing stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just complete quiet that seemed to press against my ears. Then I saw the footprints. They led from the dig site toward the tree line, but they weren't human prints. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the toes. But they were in a straight line, the way a person walks, not the four-footed gait of an animal. I followed them to the edge of the clearing. At the tree line, they stopped. Not faded out or gotten harder to see, just stopped, like whatever made them had simply vanished. I was photographing the prints when my radio crackled. "Mike, you up there already?" Jim's voice. "Yeah, just checking the site. We're about 10 minutes out. Everything okay?" I looked back at the excavation. The soil was still warm under my feet, and the silence was still too complete. But what was I going to tell him? That the ground was warm and I was hearing Cherokee songs from empty air? Everything's fine. See you when you get here. But everything wasn't fine. When Jim's team arrived, they found the same thing I'd seen the day before. The excavation had changed overnight. Areas that had been carefully measured and photographed were now different depths. Some showed undisturbed soil layers that should have taken years to form. It's like the site is aging and unaging, Sarah said, comparing her photographs. Look at this. She showed me 2 pictures of the same pottery shard. In yesterday's photo, it was clean, newly excavated. In this morning's photo, it looked weathered, like it had been exposed to the elements for months. Maybe it's the camera, I suggested. Same camera, same settings, same lighting. She shook her head. I've been doing archaeological photography for 8 years. I've never seen anything like this. Dr. Martinez, the team leader, was kneeling by the dig site with a puzzled expression. The soil composition keeps changing too. Yesterday we had clear stratification layers. Today they're mixed up, like someone stirred them. I was about to suggest that animals might be responsible when I saw something that made my blood go cold. At the far edge of the clearing, just inside the tree line, stood a deer. But it was wrong. Not just standing in the wrong place or at the wrong time, but wrong in a way that made my eyes hurt to look at it. It was too tall, too thin, and it was watching us with an intelligence that no deer should have. Jim, I said quietly, look at the tree line, by the big oak. He looked where I was pointing. What? I don't see anything. I looked again. The deer was still there, still watching us. But when Jim followed my gaze, his eyes went right past it. The deer, I said. What deer? I pointed directly at it. The creature turned its head toward me, and for a second, I could have sworn it nodded. Then it stepped backward into the trees and was gone. Mike, there's no deer there. I stared at the spot where it had been standing. The trees were thick there. Easy enough for a deer to hide in. But Jim had been looking right at it, and he'd seen nothing. Never mind, I said. Thought I saw something. But I knew what I'd seen, and I was starting to understand that something on this mountain was playing by rules. I didn't understand. The day got stranger from there. Dr. Martinez found pottery shards that were embedded in tree roots, as if they'd been there when the trees were saplings. But dendrochronology showed the trees were only 30 years old, and the pottery style was much older. Sarah's cameras started malfunctioning, but only when she tried to photograph certain areas of the site. The pictures would come out blurred or completely black, even in bright sunlight. And the temperature readings kept fluctuating. The soil would be warm in the morning, normal by noon, and then warm again in the evening, following no pattern that made meteorological sense. But the worst thing was the feeling of being watched. All of us felt it, though nobody wanted to say so at first. The sense that something just out of sight was observing everything we did, taking notes, deciding whether we belonged there. It was Sarah who finally brought it up, around 3 in the afternoon. Is it just me, or does anyone else feel like we're not alone up here? Jim nodded immediately. I keep thinking I see someone in my peripheral vision, but when I turn to look, nothing's there. Same here, Doctor, Martinez admitted. And the birds have been quiet all day. That's not normal for this habitat. I'd noticed the bird silence too. These mountains were usually full of life, hawks, crows, woodpeckers, songbirds. Today, nothing. Maybe we should call it a day, I suggested. It's only 3 o'clock, Jim protested. Weather might turn. You don't want to be caught up here in a snowstorm. There were clouds building on the western ridges, but that wasn't the real reason I wanted them gone. The feeling of being watched was getting stronger, and whatever was watching us was getting bolder. I'd seen movement in the trees 3 more times, always just at the edge of vision, always gone when I looked directly. As the team packed up their equipment, I walked the perimeter of the site 1 more time. That's when I found the second set of footprints. These were human, but wrong in their own way. They appeared to start from solid rock, as if someone had stepped directly out of the granite outcrop. The prints led to the excavation site, circled it once, and then led back to the rock. I followed them to where they ended. The granite surface was smooth and unbroken. No cracks, no ledges, nowhere for a person to hide. But pressed into the stone, so faint I almost missed it, was the outline of a handprint, not carved or painted, but impressed, as if the rock had been soft when someone touched it. The handprint was larger than mine, with longer fingers, and it was warm to the touch. I was still staring at it when Sarah called out, "Mike, you need to see this." I jogged back to the excavation site. The team was standing around the main dig area, looking down into the hole they'd been working. At the bottom of the excavation, clearly visible in the soil, was a complete human skeleton. But it hadn't been there an hour ago. We'd been digging in that exact spot all day. "Where did it come from?" Jim asked. Dr. Martinez was already climbing down into the pit with his equipment. "The soil layers are undisturbed around it. This has been here for a long time. Decades, maybe centuries. But we were digging right here." Sarah protested. "I have photographs of every layer we removed." She was right. I'd watched them work this area myself. There had been no skeleton. "Doctor." Martinez was examining the bones with a small brush. "Native American, probably male, middle-aged. These grave goods." He paused, looking closer. "These are Cherokee, but the style is much older than this site should be." He held up a small clay figure, a bird with outstretched wings. Even from where I stood, I could see it was beautifully made, with intricate feather patterns carved into the clay. "This is museum quality," he said. "Pre-contact, definitely. Maybe 500 years old." Jim shook his head. "The site's only been dated to 200 years ago, max. Then we've been wrong about the dating." I looked around the clearing again. The shadows were getting long, and the temperature was dropping fast. The feeling of being watched had intensified to the point where the back of my neck was actually tingling. "We need to leave," I said, "now." "But this is a major find, Doctor," Martinez protested. "We need to document everything." "Document it tomorrow. We're losing light, and I don't like the weather." The clouds were definitely building now, dark and heavy. But that wasn't what worried me. What worried me was the absolute silence. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just the sound of our own breathing and the soft scrape of Dr. Martinez's brush against bone. As we loaded the last of the equipment, I took one more look at the skeleton in the pit. The afternoon light was fading, but I could still see the clay bird figure clearly. For just a moment, in the shifting shadows, it looked like the bird moved, turned its head toward me, watched me with small, dark eyes. I blinked, and it was just clay again. But as we drove down the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd disturbed something that had been sleeping. And now it was awake, and it was deciding what to do about us. I didn't sleep again that night. Every time I dozed off, I dreamed about the clay bird turning its head to watch me. By morning, I'd made a decision. I was going up to Cherokee Ridge alone before the archaeology team arrived. The drive up felt different again. The forest was too quiet, and my truck's engine seemed too loud. I kept checking my mirrors, feeling like something was following me, but the road behind me stayed empty. At the site, everything had changed. The excavation pit where we'd found the skeleton was empty, not filled in empty, like the bones had never been there. But the soil around it showed the clear impressions of where they'd lain. Worse, there were more handprints pressed into the surrounding rocks, dozens of them, all different sizes, as if a whole group of people had emerged from the stone during the night. I was photographing the prints when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, hand going to my radio, but there was no one there. Just the clearing, empty and silent. But the footsteps continued, a slow, steady rhythm circling the excavation site. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Breathing. Slow, deep breaths that seemed to come from all around me. Not human breathing, too deep, too controlled. I backed toward my truck, keeping my eyes on the tree line. That's when I saw them. Figures standing just inside the forest, barely visible in the shadows between the trees. At first, I thought they were people. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized they were wrong. Too tall in some places, too short in others. Proportions that didn't quite make sense. And they were all watching me. I counted at least 8 of them, maybe more. They stood perfectly still, like they'd been there for hours, waiting. My hand was on my radio when one of them stepped forward. It looked like a Cherokee man, middle-aged, wearing traditional clothing. But he was slightly transparent, like he was made of morning mist. And when he walked, his feet didn't quite touch the ground. "You have Cherokee blood," he said. His voice carried clearly across the clearing, but it sounded like it came from very far away. I found my voice. "Who are you?" "I am what remains of those who lived here before. We have been waiting for one who could see us." The other figures began moving closer, stepping out of the trees. Men, women, children, all with that same translucent quality. All wearing clothes from different time periods, some in traditional Cherokee dress, others in the clothing of the early 1800s. "You're dead," I said. It wasn't a question. "Death is just another form," the man replied. "We are the memory of this place, the keepers of what was lost." I understood then. These weren't ghosts in the traditional sense. They were something else, something tied to the land itself. "What do you want?" "To show you what really happened here. To show you what your people have forgotten." Before I could respond, the world around me shifted. The clearing was suddenly full of Cherokee people, not the translucent figures, but solid, living people. The excavation pit was gone, replaced by a fire circle where families sat sharing a meal. Children played between the trees. The whole scene was vibrant with life and laughter. "This is how it was," the man said, "before the removal, before the soldiers came." The scene shifted again. Now the clearing was full of soldiers in blue uniforms. Cherokee families were being forced at gunpoint to gather their belongings. Children were crying. Elders were struggling to walk. 16,000 of our people were forced from their homes, the man continued. 4,000 died on the journey west. But some of us never left. The vision faded, and I was back in the present. But the translucent figures remained, watching me with ancient eyes. "We bound ourselves to this land," the man explained. "Our spirits, our memories, our obligation to protect the sacred places. We became the guardians, the shapeshifters your grandmother told you about." "My grandmother? How did he know about her?" "She could see us too, at the end. She told us you would come eventually, that you would be the bridge between what was and what is." I was shaking now, partly from cold, but mostly from the impossibility of what I was seeing. "This isn't real. People don't just stay behind as spirits, don't they?" The man smiled sadly. "Your science cannot explain everything, Michael Ravencroft. Some things require a different kind of understanding." One of the other figures, an elderly woman, stepped forward. She carried a bundle of sage that smoked without fire. "The archaeologists are disturbing the resting places," she said. "Their digging is breaking the barriers we have maintained for generations. Other things are beginning to stir. Darker things." "What kind of things?" "Spirits that were bound here for good reason. Entities that fed on suffering and death. They have been sleeping since the removal, held down by our constant vigil. But if the sacred sites are disturbed too much..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "The skeleton you found yesterday," the man said. "That was my son. He died protecting this place from one of those entities, 200 years ago. His spirit has been standing guard ever since." I thought about Dr. Martinez carefully brushing dirt from the bones, taking measurements, preparing to remove them for study. What happens if they take the bones? The binding will be broken, and something that has been hungry for 2 centuries will be free to feed again. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the November air. "I have to warn them," I said. "You can try. But will they believe you?" Before I could answer, I heard the sound of vehicles coming up the mountain road. The archaeology team was arriving. "Choose wisely, Michael Ravencroft," the man said. "Your ancestors are counting on you." The figures began to fade, stepping backward into the forest like smoke dissipating in the wind. In seconds, they were gone, leaving me alone in the clearing. But the warmth in the soil remained, and the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. When Jim's team arrived, they found me standing by the excavation pit, staring into the empty hole. "Where are the bones?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Immediately." "Gone," I said. "Gone how? Did animals get to them?" I almost told him the truth then. Almost said that the spirits of Cherokee warriors had reclaimed their guardian. But looking at their faces, logical, scientific, rational, I knew they'd never believe me. "Maybe we misremembered where we found them," I said instead. Jim frowned. "I have GPS coordinates. And photographs." Sarah was already checking her camera. "The pictures from yesterday, they're gone. Just blank frames." "That's impossible," Dr. Martinez said. But I was learning that impossible didn't mean much in these mountains. They spent the morning re-excavating the pit, looking for any trace of the bones they'd found. They found nothing. Not a fragment, not a tooth, not even a stain in the soil where a body should have decomposed. By noon, they were arguing among themselves about what could have happened. Equipment malfunction, memory errors, some kind of hoax. I didn't contribute to the discussion. I was too busy watching the tree line, where I could occasionally see translucent figures moving between the shadows. The Cherokee spirits were still there, still watching, waiting to see what the archaeologists would do next. Around 2 o'clock, Dr. Martinez made a decision that filled me with dread. "We're going to expand the excavation," he announced. "If there was one burial here, there might be others. We'll grid out a larger area and do a systematic survey." "That's a lot of work," Jim said. "This site is more significant than we thought. The pottery, dating inconsistencies, the mysterious burial, the unusual soil composition, something important happened here. We need to understand what." I wanted to tell him that something important was still happening here, that every shovelful of dirt they moved was weakening the barriers that kept ancient evils asleep. But how do you explain spiritual guardianship to people who deal in carbon dating and soil analysis? As they began marking out the expanded excavation area, I felt the temperature around me drop. Not the gradual cooling of afternoon in the mountains, but a sudden, sharp cold that made my breath visible. The Cherokee spirits I'd seen earlier were gathering again, more of them this time. They stood in a loose circle around the clearing, transparent figures in traditional dress. Their faces were grave, worried. One of them, a young woman, caught my eye and shook her head slowly. A warning. But it was too late. Dr. Martinez had already started digging in the new section, and his shovel hit something hard. "Metal?" he called out excitedly. "Looks like another artifact." He brushed away the soil carefully, revealing what looked like an iron collar or band. It was old, corroded, but covered in symbols that weren't Cherokee. They looked older, cruder, like something from a much darker time. The moment he lifted it from the ground, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. And somewhere in the distance, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Laughter. Low, cruel laughter that seemed to come from underground. The Cherokee spirits around the clearing began backing away, fear clear on their translucent faces. "Put it back," I said urgently. "What, Doctor?" Martinez looked up from the iron collar. "Put it back, right now. This is an incredible find. Look at these symbols. I've never seen anything like..." The laughter got louder, closer. And somewhere beneath our feet, something that had been sleeping for 200 years began to wake up. The laughter stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving a silence so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. "Doctor." Martinez was still examining the iron collar, but I could see his hands were starting to shake. "The metal's warm," he said, confused. "How is it warm?" I knew exactly how it was warm. Something had been wearing that collar when it was bound here 2 centuries ago. Something that was starting to remember what it felt like to be free. "Everyone needs to leave. Now," I said. Jim looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Mike, what's wrong with you? First you're seeing deer that aren't there. Now you want us to abandon a major archaeological find?" Before I could answer, Sarah's camera started acting up again. But this time, instead of taking blank pictures, it was showing images on its screen that she wasn't photographing. Faces twisted, angry faces that looked like they were trying to claw their way out of the camera. "That's not possible," she whispered, dropping the camera. It hit the ground and the screen went black. The Cherokee spirits around the clearing were becoming more visible, their translucent forms solidifying as whatever had been bound here grew stronger. I could see them clearly now, and they were terrified. The elderly woman with the sage bundle was pointing at the iron collar and speaking rapidly in Cherokee. I caught enough words to understand: Neha, Kidua, Utsanati, evil spirit, sacred fire, bone eater, the bone eater. I'd heard that name in my grandmother's stories. An entity that fed on death and suffering, that could take any shape but always left behind gnawed bones and the smell of decay. The Cherokee had fought it for generations before finally finding a way to bind it, and Dr. Martinez was holding the binding in his hands. "Put it down," I said again, more urgently this time. "This could rewrite our understanding of Cherokee spiritual practices," he protested. "Look at these symbols. They're not decorative, they're functional, like a lock or a seal." "A seal, exactly," a seal that was weakening every second he held it. The ground beneath our feet started to vibrate, just slightly at first, like a truck passing on a distant road. But it was getting stronger. Earthquake? Jim asked. But I knew it wasn't an earthquake. It was something underneath us, testing the boundaries of its prison. The Cherokee spirit who had spoken to me earlier materialized beside the excavation pit. His face was grim. "It's too late," he said. "The binding is breaking. You have to get them away from here." "What about you?" I asked. "We'll do what we can, but we've been holding it for 200 years. We're tired." Dr. Martinez was staring at me. "Mike, who are you talking to?" He couldn't see them. None of them could. The Cherokee spirits were visible only to me, and I was the only one who understood what was really happening. That's when the ground split open. A crack appeared in the center of the excavation pit, maybe 6 inches wide and perfectly straight. It was so deep that our flashlights couldn't find the bottom, and from that crack came a sound that made everyone step backward. Breathing. Deep, hungry breathing, like something that had been suffocating for a very long time. "Okay," Jim said shakily, "maybe we should go." But as they started gathering their equipment, the breathing from the crack got faster, more excited, like it could sense them preparing to leave. Sarah tried to pick up her camera, but when she touched it, the screen flickered back to life. This time it showed the clearing as it had been 200 years ago. Cherokee warriors in a circle around the pit, chanting and throwing offerings into a much larger crack in the ground. And at the bottom of that crack, something dark writhing in obvious pain. "They were binding it," I said, understanding. This whole site, it was a prison. The iron collar in Dr. Martinez's hands was getting hotter. I could see his palms starting to smoke. "Drop it!" I shouted. He tried to, but his hands wouldn't open. The collar was stuck to his palms like it had melted there. "I can't," he gasped. "It's burning, but I can't let go." The Cherokee spirits were moving closer now, forming a circle around, for us, just like their ancestors had done centuries ago. They began to chant, the same words I'd heard from the crack in the ground on Sarah's camera, but they were translucent, weakened by 2 centuries of constant vigilance. Their voices were thin and tired. The crack in the ground widened, and something started to climb out. It looked like a hand at first, pale, too long, with fingers that bent in directions human fingers shouldn't bend. Then an arm, equally wrong. The breathing from the crack became excited, gasping as more of the thing pulled itself toward the surface. "Run," I told the archaeology team. "Get to the trucks and drive. Don't stop until you're off the mountain." "What about you?" Jim asked. "Someone has to stay." I didn't know what I could do that 200 years of Cherokee spirits hadn't already done. But my grandmother's voice was in my head, telling me stories about the Bone Eater, about the warriors who had died to bind it, about the responsibility that came with Cherokee blood. The thing in the crack was almost free now. I could see its head hairless, with skin like old leather, and eyes that were just empty holes. Its mouth was full of teeth, but they weren't human teeth. They were sharp, designed for tearing meat from bones. Dr. Martinez was screaming as the iron collar burned deeper into his hands. The symbols on the metal were glowing now, red hot, and they were moving, rearranging themselves. The lock was opening. That's when I realized what I had to do. I pulled my service weapon and shot Dr. Martinez in the shoulder. He spun around and fell, the shock making his hands finally open. The iron collar hit the ground and bounced once, its symbols still glowing. The thing in the crack shrieked with rage and pain as the binding snapped back into place. Its claws scrabbled at the edges of the pit as it was dragged back down into darkness. But I could tell it wasn't fully bound again. The collar was damaged, cracked from its impact with the ground. The prison was weakened. The Cherokee spirits gathered around the iron collar, their voices joining in a chant that seemed to come from the earth itself. Slowly, their translucent forms began to solidify, drawing power from the sacred ground. "We can hold it," the elder spirit told me, "but not forever. The old bindings are failing. We need new ones." "How?" "Cherokee blood, freely given. A willing guardian to share the watch." I understood. Someone had to stay. Someone had to take on the responsibility of keeping the Bone Eater bound. Not just for days or weeks, but for life. Dr. Martinez was on the ground, clutching his wounded shoulder and staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Which, From his perspective, I probably had. Go, I told him. All of you. Leave the collar. Leave everything. Just go. Jim was helping Dr. Martinez to his feet. Mike, you shot him. You actually shot him. He'll live. The alternative was much worse. They loaded Dr. Martinez into one of the trucks and drove away. I watched their taillights disappear down the mountain road, knowing I'd never be able to explain what had really happened here. When they were gone, I picked up the cracked iron collar. It was still warm, and the symbols were still glowing faintly. I could feel the thing below straining against its weakened bonds. What do I have to do? I asked the Cherokee spirits. The elder stepped forward. Accept the responsibility. Let us share our burden with you. But understand, once you agree, you can never leave this mountain. You will be bound to it as we are. I thought about my life down in the valley, my apartment, my job, my normal existence. Then I thought about what would happen if the Bone Eater got free. How many people would die before anyone believed the truth? I accept, I said. The Cherokee spirits formed a circle around me. Their chant grew stronger, and I felt something flowing from them into me. Ancient knowledge, memories of the binding rituals, understanding of what the Bone Eater really was and how to keep it contained. The iron collar in my hands began to change. The cracks sealed themselves, and new symbols appeared, Cherokee symbols that I somehow knew how to read. They spoke of guardianship, of sacrifice, of the eternal watch. I placed the collar back in the excavation pit. As soon as it touched the ground, the crack sealed itself. The breathing from below stopped. The temperature returned to normal. But I was changed. I could feel the presence beneath the mountain, sleeping but not gone. And I could feel the Cherokee spirits around me, no longer struggling alone to maintain the binding. Welcome, guardian, the elder said. You are one of us now. That was 3 months ago. The official report says that Dr. Martinez was accidentally wounded during a firearms malfunction while we were investigating animal activity at the archaeological site. Equipment failures and unstable soil conditions led to the site being declared too dangerous for continued excavation. The area is now permanently closed to archaeological work and limited to essential ranger activities only. I'm the only one with regular access, which suits everyone just fine. Dr. Martinez recovered fully, though he's never asked to work in the Cherokee Ridge area again. He tells people that the altitude affects his equipment. Jim Torres transferred to a site in Arizona. Sarah Chen won't use the cameras that were at the site. She says they're cursed. None of them remember the skeleton we found. None of them remember the iron collar. Their minds have edited out the parts that don't make sense, the way human minds do when confronted with the impossible. But I remember everything. I still work as a ranger, but my duties have expanded beyond what's in any job description. 3 times a week, I hike up to Cherokee Ridge to check the binding. I've learned to read the signs, temperature fluctuations, changes in animal behavior, the way the Cherokee spirits become agitated when the Bone Eater stirs in its sleep. Twice, I've had to perform renewal ceremonies, using knowledge that the spirits have taught me. Cherokee words and rituals that were old when the first European settlers arrived. My grandmother would be proud, I think. She always said I had the old blood. I can see all of them now, dozens of Cherokee spirits who chose to bind themselves to this land rather than let ancient evils run free. They're not ghosts in the traditional sense. They're guardians, protectors, willing prisoners who traded their freedom for the safety of others. And I'm one of them now. The transformation isn't complete yet. I'm still solid, still fully alive. But I can feel myself changing, becoming more connected to the mountain, less tied to the world below. In another year or 2, I probably won't be able to leave the forest at all. I don't mind. There are worse fates than protecting something sacred. The Bone Eater isn't the only thing bound in these mountains. There are other sites, other prisons, other guardians. The Cherokee spirits have shown me locations throughout the Appalachians where ancient evils sleep under the watch of the dead. Most of them are stable, but some are weakening. Climate change, development, tourism, all of it puts pressure on the old bindings. Someday, others like me will be needed. Others with the blood and the will to take on the eternal watch. If you're hiking in these mountains and you see things that don't make sense, footprints that lead nowhere, temperatures that don't match the weather, sounds of voices speaking in languages you don't recognize, show respect. You're walking on sacred ground, and the people who died to keep it safe are still there, still watching. And if you have Cherokee blood, if you feel drawn to the old places, if you can, see things others can't, be careful. The spirits are always looking for help, and once you accept their burden, there's no going back. The mountains have long memories. They remember everything that's ever happened on them, the good and the evil, the living and the dead. They remember the price that was paid to keep certain things sleeping, and they remember that some prices are worth paying, no matter how high they are. I'm writing this on a cold December morning, sitting in my cabin at Cherokee Ridge. Outside my window, I can see the shapes of my fellow guardians moving through the forest, keeping their eternal watch. The binding is strong today. The bone eater sleeps quietly, but it dreams, and in its dreams, it's always hungry. That's why we're here. That's why we stay. That's why, when the time comes, others will join us. Because some things are too dangerous to let loose in the world, and someone has to stand guard, even if it costs everything.